Of a young man is hidden deep in the woods with little trace of his killer.
No blood, no prints, no indication of anything.
Whose wrong side did he get on?
The search for his killer reveals a laundry list of potential suspects.
Yeah. I swear, I didn't even touch the guy.
It seems very possible it could have been a revenge killing.
But who really wanted the victim dead?
Whoever did this is incredibly violent and incredibly dangerous.
I ain't playing. Come back here and kill you too.
Sheriff's Office of the Ward, come to the door.
Go, 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 go.
Step out of the car! Out of the car!
Emotion is the driving force behind violent crime. Emotion doesn't consider consequences. It doesn't consider judgment. It's just emotion. If your behavior causes emotion to rise to a critical level, you are at personal risk.
There's one thing that never changes: murder. A life has been taken. Their stories are now my stories. I never know where a case is going to lead, but I'll never stop until it's solved. Somebody has to look up.
Manage with a hike off Rampart Range Road, just outside the city of Colorado Springs.
Rampart Range Road was a really nice place. You're out in the woods, you can go and look at the views and stuff like that.
It's amazing out here.
Wait until you see Pikes Peak.
My sister Dana lived here, and we came down for a visit. First time I've been in Colorado Springs in my life.
Dana, come here.
What?
What is that?
I looked over and
Oh my God.
I was like, wow, whoa.
We need to call someone.
In my mind, there wasn't any doubt.
Let's go.
We had a dead body in front of us. It's a memory that's etched in my brain. That's one of those things I'll never forget.
Within the hour, investigators from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office are on the scene.
Dispatch, it's an I-7.
1490, Roger.
Afternoon, Detective Hatch.
Hey, Jeff, you first on scene?
Yes, sir.
Murders occur sometimes very close to the city-county line. This particular case, there was no doubt. It is well outside of the city limits of Colorado Springs. It falls in the jurisdiction of the El Paso County Sheriff's Department.
All right, what are we looking at?
A couple people found a body at the bottom of the embankment over here.
Maybe a hiker took a spill?
I don't think so. You'll see when we get over there. Coroner's here already.
All right, well, let's take a look.
I know Detective Hatch fairly well. He was a good detective. He was dogged. He would stay on something.
Detective Hatch makes his way down the embankment carefully so he can closely examine the remains.
Hey, guys. Good God.
He's quite disturbed by what he sees.
A black male, a plastic sack taped at the neck. There was a blue blanket partially wrapped around him. His wrists were bound behind him and some sort of strap around his ankles.
Definitely not a fallen hiker. Any idea how long this guy's been down here, Bowerman?
The body is pretty swollen, but I'm not seeing a lot of skin discoloration. Less than 24 hours.
How about what killed him?
No obvious wounds, but we're waiting to see what's under this bag.
It was apparent that this person had been brutally beaten. His face was swollen beyond identification.
Any wallet or other ID lying around?
Negative, no clothes, nothing.
Did you see any footprints when you first came in the area, Jeff?
No blood, no prints, no indication of anything.
Now, it's apparent this did not happen at this location. This is a disposal site of human remains.
Okay, well, let's continue to scan the area for evidence. In the meantime, I want to take a look up there.
So detectives started walking back up the ravine, up towards the top of the overlook.
Are you seeing anything? Hey, wait a minute. Check that out.
Drag marks.
Yep.
My initial assumption was this is its appearance of a body being dragged and the heels dragging on the ground.
Look familiar?
They noticed little pieces of this blue Afghan blanket that was found wrapped around the body.
Looks like you got your hands full with this one.
Yeah. We're not going to get anywhere unless we ID this guy.
The first step in any murder case is who got murdered. That gives you a place to begin.
I think I'm going to need a little help on this one.
Yeah, just keep me in the loop once the guy's booked. Okay, thanks.
In 1996, I had spent 23 years and change on the police department, which equates to 106 years of doing anything else. And I was thinking I was eligible to retire the coming August. I hadn't made the decision, but I was getting close.
It's Kenda.
Hey, Joe, Rich Hatch
From the sheriff's office, how are you?
Hey, Rich, I'm all right.
So the sheriff's detectives contact me directly and say, are we missing a black male approximately 20 years old? They do so because we carry most of the missing persons reports in the jurisdiction.
Do you have the victim's fingerprints?
Yeah,
You think you can have you guys run them for me?
I'll have the lab make it a priority.
thanks, Joe.
Appreciate that.
While Kenda does his part to help, Detective Hatch hopes the autopsy will reveal more clues about the victim's cause of death.
Once I got the blood cleaned off of him, I had a better sense of his injuries. The beating was more vicious than I thought.
The victim had suffered numerous skull fractures and lacerations around the head and the face area. The coroner ruled that these injuries were caused by some type of blunt force object.
Any idea what the instrument was?
No, could be a number of things, but whatever it was about a ½ inch in diameter. It did severe damage.
He was hit with great force and further had a series of subdural hematomas to the brain, which caused his death.
His neck seems to be pretty bruised as well. Any evidence of strangulation?
Oh yeah, the hyoid bone's completely crushed, but the strangulation occurred after death.
Whoever did this is incredibly violent and incredibly dangerous. There's an enormous amount of overkill. There is a rage factor when you beat someone so severely that they die. Your intent is not just to kill them, but to punish them.
With the cause of death confirmed, Detective Hatch checks in on Kenda's progress.
Hey, Joe. Any luck on that missing persons?
Unfortunately not. However, we did get a hit on the print.
We determined that the victim is 21 years of age and his name is Derek James.
You look him up?
Yeah, check this out.
Wow.
When the victim, Derek, was identified through the database, it also revealed that he had an extensive criminal history.
Criminal trespassing, aggravated theft, breaking and entering, violation of probation, the list goes on.
Looks like he got out of prison pretty recently.
He's only been out of the penitentiary for 60 days, and it wasn't his first hit. This kid's been around the block at age 21.
I'm sure he hung around with a pretty tough crowd.
There's an old expression, if you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. And maybe there's a flea who decides that Derek needs to go away. We are assisting the Sheriff's Department in an investigation of a disposed homicide victim found over an overlook on the Rampart Range Road. We've identified him as Derek James. In our records, we discover someone listed as a foster father whose name is Jimmy Ayers, and he lives in the city of Colorado Springs.
Mr. Ayers, I'm afraid I have some bad news. I'm sorry to say Derek is dead.
What?
Mr. Ayers is shocked by this information.
We found his body out on Rampart Range Road.
I'll be damned. I really thought that boy was heading down the right path this time.
Jimmy Ayers really thought Derek was turning his life around, and so it was extra sad for him to find out that he had been murdered this way.
Mr. Ayers, how long have you been his foster parent?
since junior high.
Derek's mother had actually died in prison, and his father was in prison. And because he really didn't have any parents or family, he finally became a ward of the state in Colorado.
The boy had a tough go at it, in and out of prison. But I really thought he was committed to changing his life this time.
Derek was trying to turn his life around and had enrolled in a program that helped mentor young offenders to try to not make the same mistakes that he did.
When was the last time you saw Derek?
DJ. Everyone calls him DJ.
DJ.
It was a couple of days ago. He came by, I fed him, and we talked about him getting a job. He left the next day saying he was going to his girlfriend's house.
And I haven't seen him since.
Girlfriend, what's her name?
I really don't know. It's hard to keep up with all the girlfriends he has.
One of the things that Jimmy says about Derek is that he knows how to turn the charm on, always has a girlfriend or two.
Perhaps one of these girlfriends would know what happened to him or whose wrong side did he get on.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Ayers, and I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
So the next best thing to do is to find out who is the most recent girlfriend of DJ.
But before Detective Hatch can dig any deeper into Derek James's personal life, he's hit with some interesting news.
Detective Hatch.
What's up, Tina?
A girl just dropped by, wanting to talk about that murder up on Rampart Range Road.
Really? She's still here?
Yeah, she's waiting for you in the conference room.
Thanks.
This woman says her street name is Bambi and that she knows DJ and she knows who killed him. Well, that's pretty significant.
I understand you may have some information about what happened with Derek James.
Yeah.
Are you his girlfriend?
No, but we've been friends for a long time. And I know the guy he was recently beefing with.
Bambi told investigators that after he got out of prison on this last stint, he had a run-in with an old acquaintance.
His name is Sam Fuller. Everybody call him Trip.
Bambi advised that at one time, Derek and Trip had been pretty good friends.
And what happened between DJ and Trip?
She says they got into it over the affections of a girl. And that is a very common motive in murder.
Do you know where Trip lives?
Yeah, but you can't tell him I told you anything. I don't want to get killed.
It's okay. You have my word.
With a new lead to pursue, Detective Hatch heads to the home of Sam Fuller, a.k.a. Trip.
Yeah. Mr. Fuller, we're detectives from the sheriff's office. You mind stepping out in the hall?
So what exactly do you guys want?
He's perplexed. Why are the police at my house? I've done nothing wrong.
Mr. Fuller, we're here to talk about Derek James.
DJ? I haven't seen that boy in a minute.
Well, that's not what we heard.
What you mean?
Trip, do you know how Derek James ended up dead?
Dead? You saying somebody killed him? What happened?
Trip was quite surprised at that. The emotion was genuine. You could tell that he really did not know that Derek had been killed.
So you're saying you and DJ did not have an issue over a girl?
Nah, man, we used to go running together and chase the same girls or whatever, but I don't hang with those people no more.
He admits they've been in and out of jail together on a number of occasions, but in the recent past, Sam Fuller straightened out his life, and he said, I don't do that anymore.
Okay. You have any kind of alibi for the last few days?
Yeah, I sure do. I've been working. You can call my boss.
Can I check on that?
Can I use the phone in here?
Yeah.
Okay, Trip. I know you said you haven't seen DJ in a while, but do you know if he had any girlfriends?
Girlfriends? DJ was a dog, man. But last I heard, he was seeing this one girl.
He said, somebody told me that his main squeeze these days is a female named Sheila Barnhart.
Sheila Barnhart. Any idea where she lives?
Nah, man, I never met her before.
All checks out.
So they dismissed Mr. Fuller and assumed that Bambi is telling a tale.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Appreciate your time.
So their focus now is on Sheila Barnhart. Who is she and what does she know?
Detective Hatch and his partner waste little time tracking down an address.
Can I help you?
When this woman answers the door, she's wearing rubber cleaning gloves, and she is perspiring.
Excuse me, ma'am. We're looking for Sheila Barnhart.
They get the deer in headlights look from her, and she stammers and says, well,
Sheila, she's not here. I'm her sister, Stephanie.
and they look over her shoulder, and this apartment is filled with cleaning products.
What are you doing in there, Stephanie?
Just cleaning.
Yeah, I can see that. You missed a spot?
Well, my. Blood spatter on the ceiling only gets there one way. Cast off from a blunt instrument. What's been happening in here? Did Derek James happen in here? The Sheriff's Department's investigating the brutal death of Derek James. They're in an apartment that's supposed to contain his most recent girlfriend, Sheila Barnhart, but they find her sister, Stephanie, cleaning up what appears to be a crime scene.
From what the investigators were able to observe just from the front door, that gave them probable cause to ask for a warrant for the search of this house.
Officer, check under that carpet.
When people try to clean up blood stains, a lot of times they'll use bleach. But you pull the carpet up, the blood is still underneath the carpet on the floor.
You come get this. There. Luminol ready yet?
Give me just a second.
Luminol is a chemical that causes human blood to fluoresce. It will even cause invisible to the human eye blood to fluoresce.
All right, Luminol's ready.
Okay, kill the lights, please.
This apartment glows in the dark. This place is covered in blood.
You could see the efforts of where it had tried to be cleaned up, but it was just so much that that wasn't working.
I found this on the couch.
Well, I'll be damned.
CSI had located some pieces of fuzzy blue material which matched the blue Afghan that was found on the victim's body.
You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to realize that this is where Derek James met his untimely demise. So Stephanie's in this up to her neck.
Okay, Stephanie, it's time for you to tell me what the hell is going on here.
I don't actually know.
Then why are you cleaning up a crime scene?
So last night, my sister Sheila called me and she was freaking out, said something had happened to DJ and begged me to come over.
Was DJ here when you arrived?
No, but there was blood all over the couch.
She was shocked at how much blood there was. And she said Sheila looked emotionally distraught to the maximum.
Did Sheila tell you what happened to DJ?
She just said something bad.
Well, something bad did happen to DJ, Stephanie, because DJ happens to be very dead right now.
I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know.
Where is Sheila now?
I couldn't get her to calm down, so I sent her back to my place. I told her I'd meet her there when I was finished.
Okay, Stephanie, we're gonna have to put you under arrest.
What? No, I didn't do anything. I was just trying to help.
And that makes you an accessory to murder.
No.
Officer.
One of the elements of being an accessory is the attempt to destroy or conceal evidence. And Stephanie is in the process of doing precisely that.
After Stephanie is booked on accessory charges, investigators set their sights on her sister, Sheila.
The Sheriff's Department goes to Stephanie's apartment, and as advertised, Sheila Barnhart is present. She's placed in custody because Sheila has a few things to explain, not the least of which is a dead guy on her sofa.
Okay, Sheila. This is your chance to come clean about whatever happened at your place the other night.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, let me catch you up to speed. There's mountains of blood evidence all over your home suggesting that you and your sister killed Derek James.
That isn't what happened. I didn't kill DJ.
Okay, then who did?
I don't know. But I can explain.
Then start explaining, Sheila, because you kind of need to explain.
So the other night, I got this phone call. Hello?
You tell your punk boyfriend to pay me what he owes. He ain't gonna like what happens if I got to come over there and collect it myself.
Who is this? Hello? Hello?
And she's obviously very scared and concerned. Is her life in danger? Are they really going to come over here?
Sheila, don't worry about it. It's nothing.
DJ, this guy sounded serious. I don't think he's messing around.
It's nothing. Trust me.
I just don't want anything to happen to you.
I know, but it's fine. Promise. I know. Don't wait up for me, all right? We'll be back later.
Okay. I believed him. But later that night, I heard this shouting downstairs. DJ?
What is it? Huh?
Look, man, I don't have it just yet, but I will soon.
No, man, we done waiting.
She says she sees a black male and a Hispanic male circling DJ, yelling about the money he owes them.
Yo, what's this hoe doing?
DJ?
Baby, go back to bed.
You better make yourself disappear.
What if she calls the cops?
We ain't calling no cops. If we do, we'll come back here and kill you too. And I ain't playing.
So I went back to my room, and I heard all these loud noises.
Like a fight?
Yeah. I could hear DJ begging them to stop. And then all of a sudden, the front door slammed.
She comes out of her bedroom, goes downstairs, DJ is gone, and there's blood everywhere.
Well, why didn't you call the police?
Because I was afraid. They said they were gonna kill me. I didn't know what to do.
Investigators are a bit skeptical of Sheila's story, but she's coming off as somewhat genuine. So they can't ignore the mention of these two new potential suspects.
Sheila, do you think that you can describe the men that you saw?
I can try.
She's asked to get with one of our lab techs to try to recreate a mugshot of these two people.
Like this? No, the eyebrows were definitely thicker than that.
Years earlier, they would use an artist to do this, but now there are a number of programs, and you literally assemble it on a computer screen.
Yeah, those lips look great.
You have hundreds and hundreds of possibilities, and you just keep trying until you get closer and closer and closer.
So you're positive this is what the guys who killed DJ look like?
I think so.
They have to pursue what she says because she's said it. Once the cat's out of the bag, you have an obligation to pursue it.
As the legitimacy of Sheila's lead is tested, the investigation continues to gain traction from an unexpected source.
Miss Kenda.
Lieutenant, there's a woman on the phone here. Sounds like she might have some info on that murder the sheriff's office is working.
Really? Okay, put her through.
Hello?
This is Lieutenant Kenda. Who am I speaking with?
I don't want to tell you my name.
So she gets on the phone. She's very frightened and her voice is shaky.
But I think my neighbor might be involved in that murder up on Rampart Range.
And why is that?
Well, he was packing up his stuff this morning, and he said he needed to leave town because he did something bad.
And what's your neighbor's name?
Brandon Barnhart.
Brandon Barnhart.
And that name hit me right between the eyes.
You know if he's related to Sheila Barnhart?
Yeah. Sheila's his sister.
So Brandon says he's done something bad. Oh, it was more than bad, Brandon. It was brutal. And you made the mistake of doing it in your sister's apartment. This complicated investigation has finally led us to an individual named Brandon Barnhart, who told an acquaintance that he had to flee the state because he'd done something bad. The caller provides the address where she last saw him packing his things. We go to that address to pick him up on behalf of the sheriff's department. you have an individual who is believed to be responsible for a homicide, the likelihood is great that there's going to be gunfire when you try to arrest someone like that.
Sheriff's Office of the Warrant, come to the door. Hands. Show us your hands when you step out. Slowly open the door. Step out slowly. Hands. Hands. Keep coming. Keep coming. Keep coming. Step all the way out to my partner.
You looking for Brandon?
Yeah, is he here?
No, you just missed him.
And you are?
His mother?
Is there somewhere we could talk?
She says, I've been expecting the police to come by.
I don't know what's going on, but Brandon was acting real strange this morning. He seemed like he'd gotten himself into some trouble.
She said that Brandon shows up and he's all upset and being pretty evasive and keeps telling her he's sorry, and she's wondering, what are you sorry for?
He said he needed to leave town for a while. Didn't say why. Just packed his bag and up and left. What is it you think my son did?
Ma'am, were you aware that your daughter's boyfriend, DJ, was murdered?
And you think Brandon did it?
There's a strong possibility.
God, no. No, that can't be possible. Not my boy.
As a parent, right away you'd be thinking, this is a big mistake. You have the wrong person. My son would never be involved in something like that.
Well, if he calls or tries to contact you at all, can you let me know?
Okay. I'm gonna try to get him on the phone too.
Okay. Thank you.
Now the sheriff's department is convinced that Sheila lied. Her brother is in flight, and he's not Hispanic, and he's not black. So whatever she said is a lie to prevent the discovery of the truth.
Sheila, we know your brother is somehow involved in this. Now, you need to tell us the truth, because if you don't, there's a very good chance that you will go down for whatever he did.
Okay, you're right. I didn't tell you the whole story. The truth is, DJ is just like every other boyfriend I've ever had.
She goes on to say she has been a victim of abuse by boyfriends. She thought that DJ would be different.
First, he was good to me. But I became suspicious that he was seeing other girls. And when I confronted him about it the other night, he just lost it.
She said he got upset with her and backhanded her, slapped her across the face. And then he commenced to assault her.
I told myself I was never gonna let any man mistreat me ever again. And I sure as hell wasn't gonna let DJ.
So you called your brother?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello?
Brandon, I need your help.
Why? What's wrong?
She called her brother and told him what had occurred, and he got really upset.
What? Wait, are you serious? Yo, I'll kill that son of a bitch.
I have an idea of how to get him back.
So the next day, she tells her brother that she's going to poison him by baking poison muffins. Well, you look in a recipe book, Betty Crocker doesn't have anything about poison muffins, but Sheila has an idea.
I had some sleeping pills and prescription lithium that I crushed up and put into the muffin mix.
Lithium is a very powerful drug used to treat mental illness, to treat schizophrenia, and is potentially fatal in a large amount.
Hey, babe. It smells amazing in here. Oh, you made muffins, huh?
I wanted to apologize for earlier.
Baby, you don't need to apologize. It's my fault, too.
She fed him the muffins, and sure enough, he laid down on the couch and went to sleep.
Brandon showed up with his friend Eric.
Eric who?
English. They told me to go upstairs and shut the door.
She could hear a terrible beating going on and even heard Derek say, "Stop."
She said when all the noise stopped, she came down the stairs and saw blood everywhere.
I didn't know if DJ was dead or what. I thought Brandon was just going to beat him up. I swear.
Go ahead and stand on up.
Sheila is a typical criminal trying to distance herself from the event. She apparently, in a few minutes it took to tell the story, forgot that she tried to poison him to death. Now she wants to say she didn't participate in his murder. Excuse me?
Sheila is charged with first-degree murder, and the sheriff's department sets their sights on a newly named co-conspirator.
It's not just her and her brother anymore. It's her brother, and Eric English, whoever the hell he is.
Well, a background check's done on Eric, and it discloses that he has several warrants out for his arrest. So they find out where he's living and go to his residence.
Any eyes on the suspect? Negative. Okay, hold your positions till he comes out. Copy that.
Wait a minute. Is that him?
They see a guy matching Eric English's description pull up.
We have a suspect confirmation. All right, all units prepare to move in. Use extreme caution. Go, 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 go.
You give him no opportunity to draw a weapon, no opportunity to run. You set the tone for the impending conversation.
Eric English! Eric English! Step out of the car!
So the choice is Eric English on how difficult he wants to make this arrest.
Hands up! Out of the car!
If he wants to cooperate and surrender, that's one thing.
Out of the car!
If he wants to resist, that's going to be the last thing he ever did. The Sheriff's Department is investigating the brutal murder of Derek James, and with our assistance have determined that Sheila Barnhart, Brandon Barnhart, and Eric English are the three people involved in this crime. And Eric English has just been spotted by police in his parking lot.
Out of the car!
Eric English is at a point of making a choice. Do you want to risk your life, or do you want to just get arrested?
Step out of the car! Hands up!
As I've often said to people, can you run 1,200 feet per second? Because this bullet can.
Out of the car! Step out of the car! Don't shoot! Put your hands up! Turn around.
What's going on? Eric English, you're under arrest for the murder of Derek James.
What the hell are you talking about, man?
He's taken to the El Paso County Sheriff's Department for interrogation.
Okay, Eric. Any of these look familiar?
Yo, I don't want to see that. Damn.
Why not? Aren't you the one who did it to him?
Man, I didn't know we was gonna go that far.
That is an incriminating statement.
Who's we?
Me and Brandon.
Well, how'd you get roped into this in the first place?
That night, Brandon called me asking for a ride to his sister's place.
Eric picked him up, and when Brandon got in the car, he said, I want you to help me deal with a guy who hurt my sister.
I said, sure, whatever. I mean, the dude sounded like a real prick.
What happened when you got out to the house?
The guy was sleeping on the couch, and I thought we were gonna wake him up. All of a sudden, Brandon pulled out a pipe and started knocking the hell out of him.
Eric says Brandon just went off on him and started beating him absolutely out of control. And Eric was shocked. He didn't expect it.
I swear, I didn't even touch the guy.
Well, how'd you get DJ's body out to Rampart Range Road?
I don't know. Brandon figured all that out.
Oh, well, then I guess you won't mind if we take a look in your trunk?
You know what? I want a lawyer.
Well, you're kind of too late for that, Eric. You've already buried yourself in the middle of a murder.
Well, all right then. Good luck, Eric. You're gonna need it.
Eric is now in custody, so is Sheila, but we are still missing Brendan Barnhart. We need to find him.
Luckily for the investigation, they don't need to look too far.
All right, I'll let him know. Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm Brendan Barnhart. I'm here to turn myself in.
Really? Well, fine, we'll do that. We accept all business 24 hours a day. Now we have all the players in the hands of the Sheriff's Department.
Mr. Barnhart, I'm Detective Hatch. I understand you're ready to tell us what happened to Derek James.
I didn't mean to kill him, man. That little bitch had it coming. Okay? No choice!
All right. Relax, Brandon.
Brandon is emotionally distraught. He's a perfect candidate for an interrogation.
Relax for a moment. Just tell us what happened with DJ.
Knew right from the beginning that it wasn't gonna work between him and Sheila.
What do you mean?
I've known that dude a long time.
Brandon explains that he, too, was in foster care at points in his life, just like DJ. They both wound up in group homes together, and they became friends.
And through the years, we kind of just drifted off. Stopped talking to each other as much. Kept getting into trouble, going to prison. And one day I find out he's dating my sister.
How'd you feel about that?
How do you think I felt?
He wasn't very happy about that because he knew who DJ was. Brandon even had a conversation with DJ.
I know we go way back and all, man, but I don't know about you dating my sister.
Why not?
Because I know who you are, man.
What you mean, man?
Look, all what I'm saying is, I don't want you treating my little sister like the rest of those little hoes that you run around with. Okay, she ain't like that.
You tripping, Brand.
No, I'm not. Now promise me you're gonna treat her right.
All right, man. I promise.
I tried to trust the guy, you know? And that little bitch lied to me.
So when his sister called him crying, saying that DJ beat her up, Brandon flipped a switch. He went into a blind rage.
Eric, get your ass over here now!
And all he wanted to do was get even.
So we made a plan, and I had Eric come pick me up.
Did you have some sort of weapon with you?
Yeah. Let's go. Some bitch is gonna pay.
Rebar is solid steel used in the construction of concrete, so it is, without question, a deadly weapon.
When we got there, I knew that Sheila had slipped DJ some pills. Where's he at?
He's on the couch in the living room.
Yo, DJ, why'd you rape my sister, you sick bastard? How's that feel, bitch?
Brandon says the mere sight of him set him off like a Roman candle.
You like hitting women, bitch?
He hit him as hard and as often as he could.
How's that feel?
Come on, Eric.
Eric is also participating in the attack. He's kicking him while Brandon is beating his head in with a piece of rebar.
I think he wants more, Brand. Kick his ass.
Come on.
And it sounds like Sheila was there, egging him on.
Come on.
Get him.
Come on. Come on. Come on.
Please stop.
I'll tell you when we're done. Sheila, get the rope.
Brandon said that Sheila got kind of a black web belt and tied it around his legs to keep him from squirming around. They then taped his hands together.
At some point, Brandon admits to putting the rebar under his chin and pulling back with all his strength. and he heard something snap.
Sheila, get a bag.
So they put a plastic bag over his head and tie it with duct tape to contain the leakage.
They then wrapped him in a blue blanket, drug him out to Eric's car, and then they drove him up Rampart Range Road.
Get it off the hook.
They then drug him from the trunk of Eric's car over to the side of the overlook. What a brutal way to end somebody's life.
It's a savage killing by people who are unconcerned about what they're doing because they're angry. And in their mind, that makes it okay. DJ has transgressed, and they're going to punish him.
Brandon Barnhart's disturbing confession implicates not only himself, but also his sister Sheila and his friend, Eric English. All three are charged with first-degree murder for their roles in the crime.
Eric, Brandon, and Sheila all pled guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder.
On the evening of August 4, 2002, the small English town of Soham looked exactly the way it always had. Warm summer air drifted slowly across quiet streets lined with brick houses and carefully trimmed gardens. Families gathered outside for barbecues, neighbors exchanged casual greetings over garden fences, and children rode bicycles through roads that seemed untouched by danger. It was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors during daylight, where everyone recognized familiar faces, and where parents believed they knew exactly what kind of community they were raising their children in. Nothing about that Sunday evening suggested that within hours, the town would become the center of one of Britain's most devastating criminal investigations. As daylight softened into the golden colors of late summer, two 10-year-old girls stepped away from their families with the carefree confidence that only children can possess. There was nothing unusual about their plan. They wanted to buy sweets. It was a simple request, one repeated countless times by children everywhere. They were expected to be gone only briefly before returning home. Their parents watched them leave without fear because there was no reason to feel afraid. Soham had earned a reputation as the kind of place where childhood still felt protected, where familiar streets offered comfort instead of uncertainty. No one standing on those quiet roads could have imagined that these ordinary moments would become frozen in time. The last smiles, the last conversations, the last footsteps disappearing around a street corner would later be replayed endlessly in the minds of grieving families, investigators, journalists, and an entire nation searching desperately for answers. Every ordinary detail would suddenly become important. Every passing car, every witness, every minute on the clock would be examined over and over again. Hours passed. The girls did not come home. At first, concern remained measured. Children sometimes lost track of time. Perhaps they had stopped to visit friends. Perhaps they had taken a longer route through town. Parents called neighbors. Friends telephoned one another. Familiar places were checked. Every explanation still felt reasonable because the alternative was almost impossible to imagine. Then concern slowly transformed into fear. As darkness settled over Soham, families who had expected another peaceful summer evening found themselves searching streets with flashlights instead of preparing children for bed. Names echoed across parks, footpaths, and quiet neighborhoods. Windows opened as residents leaned outside, asking if anyone had seen the girls. The answers became painfully repetitive. No. Nobody had seen them. Nobody knew where they had gone. By the following morning, the disappearance had become something far larger than a missing person report. Police officers arrived in increasing numbers. Search teams spread across fields, wooded areas, rivers, gardens, abandoned buildings, and country lanes. Helicopters scanned the landscape from above while trained dogs followed whatever scent they could find. Volunteers joined officers, walking shoulder to shoulder across farmland in carefully organized lines, hoping to discover even the smallest clue before weather or time erased it forever. Across Britain, television broadcasts interrupted regular programming with photographs of two smiling children whose faces quickly became familiar to millions of viewers. Newspapers carried their images across front pages. Radio stations repeated descriptions throughout the day. Every passing hour without news intensified the anxiety. Families across the country looked at their own children differently that week. Parents who had once allowed short walks alone suddenly questioned whether their communities were truly as safe as they believed. What made the case especially haunting was not simply that two children had disappeared. It was where they had disappeared. Soham was not known for violent crime. It was known for quiet routines. It was known for schools, churches, sports clubs, neighborhood friendships, and generations of families living only a few streets apart. The disappearance challenged something much deeper than public safety. It challenged trust itself. People began asking impossible questions. Could the girls have wandered away? Had they been taken by someone passing through town? Had they accepted a ride from a stranger? Or was the answer hiding somewhere much closer than anyone wanted to believe? The investigation expanded rapidly, yet each new day seemed only to create more uncertainty. Detectives collected statements from hundreds of residents. Every reported sighting demanded attention. Every rumor spread faster than facts. Hope rose and fell with exhausting speed. One witness believed they had seen the girls walking together. Another remembered hearing a vehicle nearby. Someone thought they recognized clothing matching newspaper photographs. Each possibility forced investigators to chase another lead, only for many of them to disappear into dead ends. Meanwhile, cameras remained fixed on Soham. Television crews stood outside police stations broadcasting live updates to an anxious nation. Reporters interviewed exhausted volunteers returning from long hours of searching fields under the summer sun. Parents watching from home desperately hoped each news bulletin would finally announce that the girls had been found alive. Instead, every broadcast ended the same way. The search continues. The emotional weight carried by the families became almost impossible to comprehend. Every ringing telephone brought a surge of hope followed by disappointment. Every knock at the door caused hearts to race. Sleep became fragmented, interrupted by endless possibilities that refused to settle into certainty. Time itself seemed distorted. Minutes felt endless. Days blurred together. Yet amid the fear and uncertainty, another image quietly entered public view. A local school caretaker appeared before television cameras. His name was Ian Huntley. He spoke calmly. His manner appeared composed. He described the disappearance as tragic and expressed sympathy for the families. Like many local residents, he seemed concerned. He answered questions politely, presenting himself as another shocked member of the community trying to understand how something so terrible could happen in such a peaceful town. To viewers across Britain, there was nothing obviously remarkable about him. He looked ordinary. His voice remained steady. His expressions appeared appropriate. In a town overwhelmed by grief, he blended almost perfectly into the background. That appearance would later become one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. Because while search teams crossed fields under relentless summer heat, while volunteers gave up work to help comb miles of countryside, while parents prayed for miracles and police worked around the clock following every possible lead, the man who had already become one of the most recognizable local faces on television was hiding a truth that would eventually shock the nation. The investigation was not simply moving toward a killer. It was moving toward someone who had already stepped willingly into the public eye. Someone who had spoken to journalists. Someone who had watched the search unfold. Someone who appeared to share the same concern as everyone else. The distance between innocence and guilt had rarely looked so deceptively small. In the weeks that followed, Britain would witness an investigation unlike any it had seen in years. Every discovery would dismantle another comforting assumption. Every new fact would reveal how appearances could conceal unimaginable violence. The disappearance of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman would ultimately become far more than a criminal case. It would expose failures in information sharing, transform national safeguarding policies, and permanently alter how communities thought about trust, familiarity, and the hidden dangers that sometimes exist not beyond the edges of a town, but quietly within it. The story that began with two children walking to buy sweets would leave a scar on Britain that, more than 2 decades later, has never fully disappeared. For nearly 2 weeks, the search refused to slow down. Each sunrise brought another wave of determination. Police officers returned to briefing rooms with fresh maps spread across tables already covered in handwritten notes, highlighted routes, and lists of names. Search coordinators assigned volunteers to fields that had already been examined once, then twice, sometimes 3 times. Experience had taught investigators a painful lesson. Evidence was often missed not because people failed to look, but because the truth had a way of hiding in places that seemed too ordinary to matter. The landscape surrounding Sohom became a silent participant in the investigation. Long stretches of farmland shimmered beneath the August sun. Narrow country lanes disappeared between hedgerows that had stood undisturbed for generations. Drainage ditches cut across open fields. Small patches of woodland cast deep shadows even during the brightest hours of the afternoon. The countryside was beautiful in the way rural England often is, peaceful, orderly, almost timeless. Yet to the people searching it, every patch of grass carried the possibility of heartbreak. Volunteers walked in disciplined lines only a few feet apart, eyes fixed on the ground. Some searched for clothing. Others looked for footprints, discarded belongings, or anything that seemed out of place. Occasionally someone would stop, signaling the rest of the line. An object would be examined. A police officer would kneel carefully beside it. Most of the time, it was nothing. A discarded drink can. An old piece of fabric. A child's forgotten toy left there months before. Hope rose for a few seconds, only to settle once again into quiet disappointment. The emotional toll spread far beyond Sohom itself. Across Britain, families who had never heard of the town before now knew the names Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman by heart. Newspapers carried their smiling school photographs every morning. Television updates became part of daily routines. Viewers who had never met either family found themselves waiting anxiously for evening broadcasts, hoping that this time the headline would finally bring relief instead of uncertainty. The story seemed impossible to ignore because it felt painfully familiar. Every parent recognized the ordinary beginning. 2 children. A summer evening. A short walk. An errand that should have taken minutes. There was no dramatic adventure. No risky decision. No obvious warning sign. That ordinary beginning made everything that followed even more frightening. Investigators understood something the public could only sense from a distance. Statistically, the longer children remained missing without confirmed sightings, the more urgent the case became. Still, officers refused to abandon hope. They followed every reported lead. A driver believed he had seen 2 girls walking near a crossroads. Another witness remembered children matching their descriptions outside a local shop. Anonymous callers phoned with theories ranging from possible abductions to sightings in neighboring counties. Every report generated paperwork. Every claim demanded verification. Thousands of investigative hours disappeared into possibilities that ultimately led nowhere. Behind the scenes, detectives also began reconstructing the girls' final known movements with extraordinary precision. Minute by minute. Street by street. House by house. They spoke to shopkeepers. They reviewed receipts. They knocked on doors where curtains had been closed on the evening of August 4th. Who had seen them? What time? Which direction were they walking? Were they alone? Did anyone notice a vehicle nearby? Even tiny differences between witness statements became significant. Memory, however, is rarely perfect. One person remembered bright sunshine. Another insisted clouds had already arrived. Someone believed the girls were laughing. Someone else remembered them walking quietly. Detectives compared timelines again and again, searching for consistency hidden beneath ordinary human error. As investigators pieced together fragments of the evening, another uncomfortable realization slowly emerged. The girls had vanished within an astonishingly short period of time. They had not traveled far. They had not crossed large distances. Somewhere between one ordinary moment and the next, they had simply disappeared. That suggested something important. Whoever was responsible likely acted quickly, confidently, perhaps even with enough familiarity to avoid attracting attention. Meanwhile, Ian Huntley remained visible within the community. He continued speaking with investigators. He continued presenting himself as a concerned resident. Neighbors described him as cooperative. Journalists who encountered him saw nothing outwardly unusual. He appeared willing to answer questions. He appeared sympathetic. He appeared exactly as innocent people often appear during public tragedies. Looking back years later, many observers would describe those television interviews as chilling. Not because Huntley looked monstrous. Quite the opposite. He looked painfully ordinary. His expressions never hinted at the horror investigators would later uncover. That ordinary appearance forced Britain to confront an unsettling reality. Danger does not always announce itself. It does not always wear an obvious face. Sometimes it stands among crowds offering help. Sometimes it watches search parties from only a few yards away. Sometimes it speaks calmly into television cameras while the truth remains buried beneath carefully chosen words. At that stage of the investigation, however, detectives had not yet reached those conclusions. They were still confronting a maze of unanswered questions. The case generated an extraordinary volume of information. Thousands of witness statements. Hundreds of potential sightings. Dozens of forensic examinations. Maps filled with colored markers. Telephone records. Vehicle movements. Timelines that stretched across walls inside temporary investigation rooms. Some officers worked until exhaustion blurred one day into the next. Coffee cups accumulated beside stacks of paperwork. Uniforms became stained with mud from repeated searches across open countryside. Yet despite the enormous effort, certainty remained elusive. The investigation had become one of patience. Every detective understood that major cases often turned on seemingly insignificant details. A forgotten conversation. An overlooked receipt. A contradiction repeated once too often. The challenge was recognizing which detail mattered before time erased its value. Outside official investigations, public speculation intensified. Rumors spread rapidly through neighborhoods. Some believed strangers passing through the area were responsible. Others suspected someone with local knowledge. Conversations that once revolved around school events and community gatherings became dominated by theories, fears, and unanswered questions. Parents walked children to places they had previously allowed them to visit alone. Simple freedoms disappeared almost overnight. Trust, once invisible because it had always existed, suddenly became fragile. The atmosphere inside Sohom changed in subtle ways. Curtains remained open later into the evening as residents watched unfamiliar vehicles pass. Neighbors noticed things they had previously ignored. People questioned memories that once seemed insignificant. Had that car always parked there? Who was walking through the neighborhood yesterday? Why had someone taken a different route home? The investigation was changing not only police work but the psychology of an entire community. Everyone began searching their own memories for clues. Everyone wondered whether they had unknowingly witnessed the beginning of a tragedy. Then, after 13 agonizing days, the search reached a place that no family ever wishes investigators to find. The discovery would transform hope into certainty. It would answer one devastating question while creating countless others. Britain's attention, already fixed upon Sohom, would soon shift from a desperate search for 2 missing children to the painstaking effort to understand exactly how such a crime had happened and how the man responsible had managed to remain hidden in plain sight for so long. There are moments in certain criminal cases when an entire nation seems to remember exactly where it was. Not because of a courtroom verdict or a dramatic confession, but because a single piece of news changes everything that came before it. Until that point, hope still has somewhere to live. Families cling to possibilities, Investigators continue to pursue every lead with the belief that the next phone call could bring a miracle, and communities refuse to surrender to the worst-case scenario. Then one discovery quietly closes the door on hope forever. For the people of Sohom, that moment arrived on August 17, 2002. The announcement did not need dramatic language. It did not need speculation or emotion. The facts alone carried enough weight. 2 bodies had been found in a remote drainage ditch near RAF Lakenheath, several miles from the town where Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman had disappeared almost 2 weeks earlier. Formal identification would take time, but the atmosphere surrounding the investigation changed instantly. Officers who had spent days searching for missing children now began preparing for a murder inquiry. The emotional shift was immediate. Across Britain, televisions remained switched on longer than usual. Newspaper presses rushed to update front pages. News presenters who had cautiously spoken of hope and ongoing searches now struggled to deliver information with the restraint such a tragedy demanded. Millions of people had followed the case from the beginning. Many had never visited Sohom, yet they felt connected to the 2 smiling faces they had seen every day on television screens and newspaper covers. The questions also changed. People no longer asked where Holly and Jessica were. Instead, they asked who had taken them. Why had it happened? Could it have been prevented? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, had the person responsible been standing in plain sight from the very beginning? Investigators now faced a different kind of challenge. A missing person investigation, no matter how urgent, is built around finding someone. A homicide investigation is built around reconstructing the past. Every movement, every conversation, every witness statement suddenly carried a different meaning. Details that once appeared ordinary had to be examined again, this time through the lens of violent crime. The timeline narrowed. The list of people who had encountered the girls grew more important. Forensic specialists returned to locations that had already been examined, searching for evidence that might previously have seemed insignificant. Nothing could be overlooked. Nothing could be assumed. Behind every investigative decision stood 2 grieving families waiting for answers that no investigation could ever truly provide. As detectives worked methodically through evidence, another realization slowly began to emerge. This crime had not been committed by chance alone. The circumstances suggested opportunity. Opportunity often points toward familiarity. Someone who understood the town. Someone who knew the routines. Someone who could approach 2 10-year-old girls without immediately causing alarm. That possibility made the investigation even more disturbing. Communities often find comfort in believing danger comes from outside, from strangers passing through unfamiliar places. The Sohom case challenged that belief in the most painful way imaginable. If investigators were correct, the threat might not have entered the town from elsewhere. It might have already been there, living an ordinary life among ordinary people. Long before detectives could prove it, the truth was already beginning to move beneath the surface of the investigation. It would not arrive through dramatic intuition or cinematic breakthroughs. It would emerge through contradictions. Small inconsistencies. Forensic evidence. Patient interviews. Careful reconstruction. The kind of work that rarely makes headlines but ultimately determines the outcome of a criminal investigation. At the center of that investigation remained a man whose face had already become familiar to millions of viewers. Ian Huntley. The local school caretaker. The concerned resident. The man who had willingly spoken to television crews while the search continued. At first glance, there seemed little reason to view him differently from countless other residents who had cooperated with police. Yet investigations often depend less on dramatic discoveries than on subtle changes in perspective. Detectives began comparing statements. Timelines were tested. Explanations that initially appeared straightforward were measured against physical evidence. Piece by piece, certainty began replacing assumption. The picture that emerged was deeply unsettling. The public had watched Huntley express concern. Investigators were beginning to examine whether those public appearances had served another purpose entirely. If that proved true, The case would become even more shocking, not only because of the murders themselves, but because of the calculated effort to appear helpful while concealing the truth. The image of the concerned neighbor would gradually collapse under the weight of evidence. In its place, detectives would uncover a pattern of deception that extended far beyond a single interview or a single statement. Every contradiction mattered. Every unexplained movement mattered. Every attempt to reshape the narrative mattered. The investigation was no longer simply searching for a killer. It was beginning to expose how easily appearances can deceive. That lesson would resonate far beyond one courtroom. It would influence policing, child safeguarding, and public understanding of criminal behavior for years to come. But before any jury would hear evidence, before any verdict would be delivered, before Britain learned how extensive the failures surrounding the case truly were, investigators still had to answer one essential question. How had a seemingly ordinary man managed to hide behind an ordinary life while committing one of the country's most devastating crimes? The answer would require months of painstaking investigation. It would reveal overlooked warnings, missed opportunities, failures in communication between police forces, and a chain of decisions whose consequences reached far beyond the tragedy itself. This is not simply the story of a criminal investigation. It is the story of trust placed in the wrong person, of assumptions that went unchallenged, of two children whose lives ended far too soon, and of a community that discovered, with heartbreaking clarity, that the greatest threats are not always the ones we fear most, they are sometimes the ones we never think to question until it is far too late. Soham was never supposed to become a place remembered by history. Long before television satellite trucks occupied its streets and newspaper photographers waited outside police cordons, it was simply another quiet market town resting in the flat countryside of Cambridgeshire. Life there moved with a rhythm that rarely demanded attention from the outside world. The landscape stretched toward the horizon in broad green fields broken only by narrow country roads, clusters of old trees, and centuries-old farmhouses that seemed almost unchanged by time. Church bells marked Sunday mornings. Local shops closed at familiar hours. Children walked or cycled through neighborhoods where almost every face belonged to someone their parents knew. For generations, Soham had been the kind of community people described with the same reassuring words. Peaceful. Friendly. Safe. Those words carried real meaning. Parents spoke to one another outside school gates without watching every passing car. Elderly residents tended their gardens with front gates left unlatched. Children spent long summer afternoons outdoors, returning home only when hunger or the fading daylight reminded them it was time for dinner. The town had not escaped crime entirely, no community ever does, but violence severe enough to dominate national headlines belonged somewhere else. It belonged to distant cities, unfamiliar neighborhoods, places people saw only through television news. Not here. That belief had become part of everyday life. It shaped routines so completely that few people ever stopped to think about it. Trust was woven into ordinary moments. A child asking to visit a friend required little discussion. A quick walk to the local shop hardly seemed worth mentioning. Neighbors looked out for one another almost automatically. Teachers knew not only their students but often their parents, grandparents, and younger siblings as well. Families attended the same churches, supported the same local football clubs, and greeted the same familiar shopkeepers week after week. Relationships overlapped in ways common to small towns. Someone's teacher might also be their neighbor. The local mechanic might coach children's sports on weekends. Faces repeated themselves everywhere. It created comfort. It also created assumptions. The summer of 2002 had arrived with the slow warmth typical of an English August. School holidays had relaxed the pace of daily life. Children woke without alarm clocks, spent afternoons playing outdoors, and counted the remaining weeks before classrooms would once again fill with uniforms, homework, and structured routines. There was an unmistakable freedom to those weeks. Bicycles leaned against fences instead of remaining locked in garages. Footballs rolled across village greens. Ice cream melted faster than children could eat it. Garden sprinklers hissed quietly beneath bright skies while parents chatted over cups of tea. The sounds of summer blended naturally into the town's identity. Lawn mowers in the distance. Dogs barking behind garden fences. Laughter echoing through narrow streets. Doors opening and closing as neighbors came and went. Nothing in those sounds suggested that they would soon be replaced by helicopter blades, police radios, and television reporters speaking live to a nation holding its breath. At the heart of Sohom stood institutions that represented stability. Schools were among the most important. Parents entrusted teachers and staff with the people they valued most. Schools were more than buildings where lessons were taught. They were gathering places where Christmas concerts, sports days, charity events, and community celebrations unfolded year after year. Children learned names long before they learned history or mathematics. Adults working within those schools naturally became familiar figures, recognized not simply by students but by entire families. The expectation of safety surrounding schools was almost unquestioned. A school caretaker was someone who opened gates before sunrise, fixed broken furniture, maintained playground equipment, and quietly kept the building functioning behind the scenes. It was not a role associated with suspicion. It represented reliability, routine, and trust. That assumption would later become one of the most painful aspects of the Sohom case. Because trust, once broken, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. Looking back now, it is tempting to search for warning signs hidden within the town's ordinary routines. Human nature encourages that instinct. We want to believe tragedy announces itself somehow, leaving clues that could have been recognized if only people had looked more carefully. Reality is rarely that accommodating. For the overwhelming majority of Sohom's residents, August 2002 began like countless summers before it. Children played. Parents worked. Families planned holidays. Neighbors exchanged greetings over garden fences. No invisible shadow hung over the town. No collective sense of unease warned that history was quietly approaching. That normality matters because it explains why the events that followed struck with such devastating force. The disappearance of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman did not simply interrupt daily life. It shattered the community's understanding of itself. Before the case, safety had been an expectation. Afterward, it became a question. People who had spent decades believing they knew everyone in town suddenly discovered that familiarity and certainty were not the same thing. The psychological impact extended far beyond fear of crime. Residents began reconsidering memories that had once seemed insignificant. Who exactly did they know? How well did they know them? Had trust been based on genuine understanding or merely years of routine interaction? Those questions would linger long after police tape disappeared and television cameras moved elsewhere. Sohom itself became divided into two versions. There was the town that existed before August 2002. And there was the town that existed afterward. The physical streets remained unchanged. The same brick homes stood where they always had. The same church overlooked familiar roads. The same fields stretched toward the horizon beneath wide English skies. Yet emotionally, everything had shifted. Places that once represented childhood freedom became permanent reminders of innocence lost. Residents who had once described Sohom simply as home now carried the knowledge that one of Britain's most heartbreaking crimes had unfolded within streets they walked every day. Years later, visitors arriving in the town often noticed its peaceful appearance first. Nothing immediately suggested national tragedy. Children still attended school. Families still gathered in local parks. Traffic remained light. Life continued because communities have no alternative but to continue. Yet beneath that appearance rested memories impossible to erase. Every anniversary revived emotions many wished they could leave behind. Flowers appeared. Names were spoken again. Moments of silence reminded residents that healing does not always mean forgetting. For investigators, journalists, and criminologists, Sohom eventually became a case study in safeguarding failures and criminal deception. For the people who actually lived there, however, it was something much simpler and far more painful. It was the place where ordinary life ended. Where two children walked down familiar streets and never came home. Where trust, once given so freely, would never again feel quite the same. To understand why the disappearance of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman shook Britain so profoundly, it is important to understand the culture that surrounded childhood in Soham at the time. In 2002, the town still reflected an idea of community that many people believed was becoming increasingly rare. Independence was not viewed as recklessness. It was seen as a natural part of growing up. Children learned responsibility through small freedoms. They walked short distances alone, visited friends without constant supervision, and were trusted with simple errands that helped them develop confidence. Parents worried, as parents always do, but their worries were balanced by years of experience living in a place where serious violence against children seemed almost unimaginable. That sense of security had not appeared overnight. It had been built slowly over decades. Every ordinary day reinforced the belief that life in Soham followed familiar patterns. School buses arrived on time. Shopkeepers greeted customers by name. Teachers watched generations of the same families pass through classrooms. Local football matches filled weekends. Community events brought together people who had known one another for years. Even newcomers were quickly recognized because unfamiliar faces naturally stood out in a town where routines rarely changed. For children, the town felt comfortably predictable. There were shortcuts everyone knew. Pavements worn smooth by years of footsteps. Corner shops where pocket money disappeared into bags of sweets. Parks where friendships formed almost effortlessly during long summer evenings. The geography of childhood was small but rich with meaning. Every street held memories. Every familiar building represented another piece of everyday life. Adults often speak nostalgically about growing up in places like Soham because communities built around familiarity offer something difficult to measure. They create the impression that danger belongs elsewhere. Familiarity becomes confused with safety. If everyone knows everyone, surely serious harm cannot happen unnoticed. The Soham case would prove how fragile that belief could be. Yet before tragedy arrived, nobody had reason to challenge it. The schools reflected this same atmosphere. Children did not enter anonymous institutions where they disappeared into crowds. Teachers knew personalities as well as academic abilities. They recognized who enjoyed reading, who preferred football during lunch breaks, who struggled with mathematics, and who never stopped talking in class. Parents expected that if something unusual happened during the school day, someone would notice almost immediately. School staff occupied trusted positions within that environment. Some stood at the front of classrooms. Others worked quietly behind the scenes. Caretakers unlocked doors before anyone else arrived. They repaired broken windows after storms, fixed leaking pipes, moved heavy furniture before assemblies, and ensured playgrounds remained safe. Their work was practical, often unnoticed unless something went wrong. Children passed them in corridors without thinking twice. Parents saw them during school events. Teachers relied upon them every day. Trust developed naturally because nothing suggested it should not. One of the most painful lessons to emerge from the investigation was not that trust is misplaced by default, but that trust alone cannot replace effective safeguarding. Communities depend upon both goodwill and accountability. When either fails, consequences can become devastating. Beyond the schools, Soham's social life revolved around simple routines rather than dramatic events. Weekends brought football matches, church services, local markets, and family gatherings. During warm evenings, the smell of barbecues drifted through neighborhoods. Garden chairs appeared on patios. Conversations stretched comfortably into twilight while children moved between neighboring gardens almost unnoticed. There was an ease to those interactions. People rarely announced every movement. If a child said they were walking to a friend's house, parents usually expected them back later without needing constant updates. That rhythm now feels distant to many people reflecting on the early years of the 21st century, yet in 2002 it remained entirely ordinary in towns like Soham. Technology also shaped that world differently. Smartphones were not yet constant companions. Children did not carry devices capable of revealing their location every second of the day. Parents relied on trust, estimated timings, and community awareness rather than digital tracking. If someone was running late, the first assumption was often that they had become distracted while playing. Only after time passed did concern gradually begin to grow. That context explains why the first hours after Holly and Jessica failed to return home unfolded the way they did. No one immediately imagined the worst. Doing so would have felt almost irrational against the backdrop of everything Sohom represented. Only later, after every ordinary explanation disappeared, did the unimaginable begin to feel possible. The investigation would eventually reveal another uncomfortable truth. Communities built upon trust can sometimes make deception easier rather than harder. When someone appears familiar, polite, and cooperative, people naturally lower their guard. Suspicion tends to focus on outsiders because outsiders are easier to identify. Familiar faces blend into daily life. They become part of the background. Criminal investigations repeatedly demonstrate this psychological tendency. People often remember strangers. They pay far less attention to individuals they believe they already understand. That human instinct is neither foolish nor unusual. It is simply how social trust functions. The tragedy in Sohom exploited precisely that dynamic. As detectives later reconstructed events, they found themselves examining assumptions that had shaped the town long before the crime itself. Familiarity had become a form of reassurance. Roles within the community carried expectations of reliability. Children recognized adults connected to schools. Parents viewed those same adults through the lens of established trust. When investigators eventually uncovered the truth, it was not merely the violence that horrified the public. It was the realization that appearances had concealed reality so completely. The contrast between expectation and truth became one of the defining features of the case. On one side stood a peaceful town whose greatest strength had always been its sense of community. On the other stood an individual who understood how easily ordinary appearances could discourage suspicion. The collision between those two realities transformed the case from a local tragedy into a national reckoning. People across Britain no longer viewed the events in Sohom as something that could happen only in one isolated place. Instead, they saw reflections of their own neighborhoods, their own schools, their own trusted routines. That recognition created a fear far deeper than statistics ever could. If it happened in Sohom, people wondered, could it happen anywhere? It was a question that lingered in living rooms, classrooms, police headquarters, and government offices long after the investigation had moved beyond its earliest stages. Before detectives could answer that question, however, they first needed to understand the lives at the heart of the case, not as names repeated in headlines, but as two young girls whose friendship, personalities, and ordinary dreams had been abruptly and irrevocably stolen. Those lives, full of laughter and everyday childhood moments, would become the emotional center of everything that followed. As the days that would later define Sohom's place in British history quietly approached, there was no visible sign that the town stood on the edge of a tragedy. The streets remained unchanged, the routines familiar, and the people who called the town home continued living ordinary lives shaped by ordinary expectations. If someone had walked through Sohom during the first days of August 2002, they would have seen children riding bicycles along residential roads, families tending their gardens, elderly couples strolling through the town center, and neighbors pausing to exchange brief conversations before continuing with their day. Nothing about the scene suggested that, within hours, every familiar landmark would acquire a new and painful meaning. The final weekend before the disappearance reflected that same quiet normality. Sunday afternoons in Sohom rarely carried any urgency. The pace slowed almost naturally. Shops served a steady stream of local customers. Parks filled with families making the most of the warm weather before another working week began. The long daylight hours of an English summer encouraged people to remain outdoors, where conversations drifted easily between front gardens, driveways, and pavements. Children, freed from the structure of school holidays, wandered between friends' houses with the easy confidence that comes from growing up in a place where almost every route felt familiar. For adults, These scenes blended together into the background of everyday life. For children, they formed the landscape of memory. A particular corner shop. A favorite shortcut. A familiar tree climbed countless times. The route to school walked so often that every crack in the pavement had become recognizable. These small details rarely attract attention until they are suddenly connected to loss. After August 2002, people would remember them differently. Roads that once represented freedom became places where investigators reconstructed timelines. Fields that had quietly bordered the town for generations became part of one of Britain's largest search operations. Even the weather from those August days entered public memory, recalled not because it was unusual but because human beings instinctively attach powerful emotions to ordinary surroundings when tragedy strikes. Psychologists often describe this phenomenon as the permanence of traumatic memory. People may forget hundreds of ordinary days. They rarely forget the ordinary day before everything changed. That is exactly what happened in Sohom. Residents later found themselves remembering conversations that had seemed insignificant at the time. Who they greeted that afternoon. Which route they drove home. What they were doing when the first news spread that 2 local girls had not returned home. The town's collective memory became divided into a simple distinction. Before and after. Long before detectives identified a suspect, long before courtrooms heard evidence, and long before national inquiries examined institutional failures, Sohom had already begun changing psychologically. Communities recover from physical damage more easily than they recover from broken trust. Buildings can be repaired. Roads can be resurfaced. Public spaces can be restored. Trust is different. Once damaged, it often leaves invisible fractures that remain long after outward life appears normal again. Parents became more cautious. Teachers became more vigilant. Children gradually encountered rules that had not existed before. Simple freedoms that previous generations considered routine began disappearing, replaced by greater supervision and heightened awareness of personal safety. Some of those changes reflected broader developments taking place across Britain, but the Sohom murders became one of the defining moments accelerating that transformation. The case eventually prompted profound discussions extending far beyond criminal justice. Questions emerged about safeguarding. About information sharing between police forces. About background checks for individuals working with children. About the responsibilities carried by institutions entrusted with public confidence. Those conversations would eventually produce significant reforms. Yet at the beginning of August 2002, none of those debates existed. There was only an ordinary town living an ordinary summer. That contrast remains one of the reasons the case continues to resonate decades later. It reminds us that history rarely announces itself in advance. The days that later become famous usually begin like every other day. People wake, make breakfast, greet neighbors, plan errands, and assume tomorrow will resemble yesterday. Only afterward do they realize they were witnessing the final hours of a life they would never experience again. Sohom's story is therefore not simply the story of a crime. It is the story of a community whose identity was forever altered by events no one believed could happen there. The town did not choose its place in history. It inherited it. Its name became permanently linked with loss, investigation, and reform not because of anything its residents sought, but because 2 children disappeared on an ordinary summer evening and a trusted member of the community ultimately stood convicted of their murders. Understanding that setting is essential before turning to the lives of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman themselves. Newspaper headlines inevitably reduced them to victims. Court documents necessarily described them within the language of evidence. Public memory often recalls them through the circumstances of their deaths. Yet before any investigation began, before police officers organized search teams, before journalists filled the streets of Sohom, Holly and Jessica were simply 2 10-year-old girls enjoying the final weeks of summer with the effortless excitement that defines childhood. They were daughters, classmates, and inseparable friends. They laughed at private jokes no adult fully understood. They argued over small things and forgot those arguments just as quickly. They looked forward to birthdays, school holidays, and the countless ordinary milestones that children naturally assume will continue stretching far into the future. Those everyday moments are what violence ultimately steals. Not only life itself, but all the ordinary tomorrows that should have followed. To understand the full weight of the Sohom case, it is necessary to begin there, not with the investigation, not with the courtroom, and not with the man who committed the crime, but with the two young lives whose absence transformed an entire town and left a lasting mark on a nation. The next chapter belongs to Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, because before they became names known across Britain, they were simply two children whose future had only just begun. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were not extraordinary because they sought attention. They were extraordinary for the opposite reason. They represented the kind of childhood that feels wonderfully ordinary in hindsight, filled with routines so familiar that no one imagines they will one day become precious memories. They were 10 years old, standing at that brief moment between early childhood and adolescence, old enough to dream about the future but still young enough to find excitement in the smallest adventures. Their world was measured not in years or careers or responsibilities, but in school terms, birthdays, sleepovers, family holidays, and afternoons spent laughing with friends. They had grown up in the same close-knit community, attending the same school, sharing many of the same experiences that naturally brought children together in a town like Sohom. Their friendship had developed without effort, the way childhood friendships often do. There was no single moment when they decided to become inseparable. It simply happened over time, through classrooms, playground conversations, shared jokes, and countless ordinary days that slowly built an unbreakable bond. People who knew them often spoke about them as though one name naturally followed the other. Holly and Jessica. Jessica and Holly. The order hardly mattered. To friends and teachers, they were simply a pair. If one appeared, the other was usually close behind. Their personalities were not identical, but they complemented each other in the effortless way that close friends often do. They could spend hours talking about subjects adults might dismiss as unimportant, only to burst into laughter over something that made perfect sense to them and no one else. They shared secrets that probably seemed enormous in the moment and completely insignificant by the following week. They imagined what secondary school might be like, wondered how much freedom they would have as they grew older, and looked forward to experiences still waiting somewhere beyond childhood. Their families watched them grow with the quiet pride familiar to parents everywhere. There were school photographs carefully placed in family albums. Certificates from classroom achievements pinned to refrigerators. Birthday cards saved in drawers. Holiday pictures capturing smiles that no one imagined would later appear on newspaper front pages across Britain. Those photographs were never intended to become symbols of national grief. They were simply family memories. The kind every household creates without considering that one day they might become priceless. Like many children their age, Holly and Jessica lived in a world where small things carried enormous importance. Choosing what to wear on a summer afternoon. Deciding whose house to visit first. Saving pocket money for sweets. Planning games that could last until the evening sun began disappearing below the rooftops. Adults often underestimate the richness of childhood because its concerns appear simple from the outside. For children, however, those moments are life itself. Every day offers another possibility. Another conversation. Another adventure waiting just around the corner. Teachers remembered them not because they demanded attention but because they participated naturally in school life. They learned alongside classmates, celebrated successes, made occasional mistakes, and experienced the ordinary challenges every child encounters while growing up. School was not simply a place where lessons happened. It was where friendships deepened, personalities developed, and confidence slowly emerged through years of familiar routines. Outside school, family remained at the center of their lives. Weekends meant spending time with parents, siblings, relatives, and friends. Summer holidays offered opportunities to enjoy the longer days without worrying about homework or classroom schedules. Simple pleasures filled those weeks. Watching television together. Playing outside until dinner. Visiting neighbors. Talking about plans for the remaining weeks before school resumed. There was comfort in those routines precisely because they felt permanent. Children rarely imagine life ending. Parents certainly do not imagine it ending during something as ordinary as a walk to buy sweets. One of the reasons the Sohom case continues to resonate decades later is that Holly and Jessica became symbols of innocence without ever intending to represent anything larger than themselves. They were not public figures. They had done nothing remarkable beyond living ordinary childhoods surrounded by people who loved them deeply. That ordinary quality made the tragedy universal. Parents across Britain looked at their own children and saw familiar reflections. Friends recognized friendships like their own. Teachers saw students whose laughter echoed through classrooms every day. The emotional connection extended beyond sympathy because so many people could imagine their own lives following the same familiar pattern. When newspapers published photographs of Holly and Jessica smiling together in matching football shirts, those images carried extraordinary emotional power. The smiles were genuine, relaxed, completely untouched by the knowledge of what lay ahead. There was no sadness in those photographs, only two children enjoying a summer day with the confidence that tomorrow would arrive just as happily as today. That confidence was real. It belonged to children who believed the adults around them had created a safe world. A world where walking through familiar streets posed no unusual danger. A world where returning home was simply part of every ordinary afternoon. Looking back, it is tempting to focus only on the final days of their lives. Yet doing so risks allowing the crime to define them completely. The investigation, the trial, and the national attention all matter because they sought justice. But Holly and Jessica deserve to be remembered first for who they were before violence entered their story. Two daughters whose parents watched them leave home countless times without incident. Two friends who found joy in each other's company. Two children whose biggest concerns should have remained school projects, birthdays, and the ordinary excitement of growing up. Those ordinary dreams were never allowed the chance to become reality. Instead, their names became permanently linked to one of Britain's most heartbreaking criminal cases. Yet behind every headline, every courtroom document, and every investigative report remained the same painful truth. Before they became victims, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were simply children living the lives they had every right to expect would continue. Their story is not tragic because it ended. It is tragic because of everything it should have become. For their families, Holly and Jessica were never simply the names that would later appear in headlines. They were daughters whose presence shaped the rhythm of everyday life in ways so ordinary that those moments were rarely noticed until they were gone. A bedroom door left open. School shoes abandoned in the hallway. Half-finished drawings on a table. Favorite television programs discussed over dinner. The sound of laughter drifting from upstairs while friends whispered about secrets that seemed impossibly important to 10-year-old girls. Every family collects these moments without realizing it. They become the background music of childhood. Only after loss do they reveal their true value. Parents often remember their children through habits rather than milestones. The way they greeted the family dog after school. The excitement in their voices when talking about an upcoming birthday. The endless questions asked during car journeys. The determination to wear a favorite outfit even when the weather suggested otherwise. These details rarely appear in police files or courtroom testimony, yet they are the memories that remain longest for those left behind. Holly and Jessica belonged to that world of small routines and uncomplicated happiness. They were approaching an age where childhood begins to stretch outward. At 10 years old, the future feels enormous. New schools, new friendships, new interests, and growing independence all seem just over the horizon. There is excitement in becoming older, mixed with the security of still returning home each evening to parents who continue to see the child behind every new sign of maturity. That balance was visible in the way they spent their summer. They were old enough to enjoy small freedoms. Young enough that those freedoms depended entirely on trust. Walking a short distance together did not feel like an adventure to adults. To children, however, it represented another step toward independence. A simple errand carried its own quiet excitement because it belonged to them. No parents leading the way. No teachers organizing the journey. Just two close friends sharing another ordinary afternoon, confident that the world around them was exactly as safe as it had always seemed. Their friendship made those moments even more natural. Some friendships require constant effort. Others seem almost effortless. Holly and Jessica belonged to the second kind. They understood each other's humor without explanation. They could spend hours together without becoming bored. Silence never felt uncomfortable because familiarity had already replaced the need for constant conversation. They shared the easy companionship that many adults spend a lifetime trying to rediscover. Teachers often observe that close childhood friends help shape one another's confidence. Children become braver together. They laugh more easily. They approach unfamiliar situations knowing someone familiar stands beside them. Holly and Jessica reflected that quiet confidence. Together, the world felt manageable. Familiar streets seemed even more welcoming when explored with a trusted friend. Their families saw that bond develop over time. Sleepovers, school events, family gatherings, afternoons that ended only when parents called them home for dinner. Those experiences slowly wove two families together through countless shared memories. None of those memories suggested that one ordinary Sunday would become the last. There is a heartbreaking contrast that runs through almost every child homicide investigation. Children spend their final days thinking almost exclusively about tomorrow. Adults who survive spend years looking back at yesterday. Holly and Jessica could not have imagined that August evening would be different from any other. Their conversations were almost certainly filled with the ordinary topics children discuss during school holidays. Television shows, friends, sweets, plans for the remaining weeks before classes resumed. Their attention remained fixed firmly on the future because childhood naturally assumes tomorrow will arrive. Their parents shared that assumption. There was no reason not to. Nothing about the afternoon hinted that routine was about to collapse into tragedy. This ordinary beginning remains one of the most emotionally devastating aspects of the Sohom case. Violence often appears more comprehensible when preceded by obvious danger. Here, there was none. No argument. No warning. No indication that an ordinary walk through familiar streets would become the final journey of two children whose lives had barely begun. When the case later dominated national news, millions of people came to know Holly and Jessica through photographs. Those images captured smiles that reflected genuine happiness rather than posed perfection. They looked exactly as children should look, comfortable, carefree, unaware that their faces would eventually become symbols recognized across Britain. Photographs possess a unique power after tragedy. They freeze time. Every smile becomes permanent. Every expression remains forever untouched by the events that followed. For grieving families, those photographs become both comfort and pain. They preserve life exactly as it was while constantly reminding everyone of what can never return. The public saw the images. Their families remembered the voices, the laughter, the personalities that no camera could fully capture. That distinction matters. Because crimes often reduce victims to evidence, timelines, and legal terminology. Families remember something entirely different. They remember birthdays that will never be celebrated. School milestones that will never arrive. Conversations that ended without anyone realizing they would be the last. For Holly and Jessica, those unrealized futures became part of the tragedy itself. There would be no first day at secondary school. No teenage dreams slowly taking shape. No university applications, careers, weddings, or children of their own. Every possibility ended before it had the chance to begin. The loss extended beyond two lives. It included every future those lives might have created. As investigators would later work tirelessly to identify the person responsible, it was these futures that silently accompanied every decision. Every interview conducted, every forensic examination completed, and every hour spent reconstructing timelines ultimately served one purpose: to seek justice for two children whose story should never have ended on a warm August evening. That evening, however, still lay just ahead. For Holly and Jessica, the day had begun like countless others before it. There was no sense of urgency. No fear. No reason to believe that a simple decision to leave home for a short walk would become one of the most heartbreaking final moments in modern British criminal history. The ordinary nature of that decision is precisely what makes the next chapter so difficult to comprehend, because history would forever remember the afternoon not for how unusual it was, but for how completely ordinary it seemed until everything changed. The final image many people remember of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman is a photograph. Two young girls standing together, smiling naturally, wearing matching football shirts. To millions who saw that image after their disappearance, it became a symbol of innocence and loss. But to the people who truly knew them, it represented something much more personal. It was not a symbol. It was simply Holly and Jessica. Two children. Two friends. Two lives that existed far beyond the tragedy that later surrounded their names. It is one of the painful realities of high-profile crimes that victims are often introduced to the world only after something terrible has happened to them. Their identities become connected to investigations, court proceedings, and headlines. Yet every victim had a life before the crime. Every victim had favorite things, private jokes, habits, hopes, and relationships that existed completely separate from the violence that eventually took them away. Holly and Jessica were no different. Their lives were not defined by the final hours they spent together. They were defined by the years that came before. The laughter shared with friends. The conversations with family. The excitement of growing older. The countless small moments that created who they were. For a 10-year-old child, the future still feels endless. The world is a place of discovery. Questions are everywhere. Possibilities appear limitless. A new school year is not simply a return to classrooms, it is another opportunity to meet people, learn new things, and discover more about yourself. Holly and Jessica were standing at that doorway between childhood and the early stages of growing independence. They were beginning to understand the world beyond their immediate families. They were developing their own personalities. They were becoming more confident in expressing opinions, making decisions, and building friendships that felt increasingly important. Like many children their age, they were no longer toddlers needing constant guidance, but they were still children who relied on the adults around them to protect the world they were learning to explore. That protection was something their families had always believed existed. It was built into the everyday structure of life. Parents prepared meals. Teachers guided them through school. Neighbors watched familiar streets. Adults created boundaries so children could experience freedom safely. The tragedy of Sohom would later force a painful national conversation about those boundaries, about trust, and about the responsibility carried by adults in positions connected to children. But before those conversations began, there were simply two girls enjoying the final weeks of summer. The summer holiday period carries a special feeling for children. Time feels slower. Days seem longer. There is a sense that anything could happen. An afternoon can transform into an adventure without planning. A simple walk can become a story retold for years. Friends become the center of the world. Small decisions feel important. For Holly and Jessica, that summer was supposed to be filled with those ordinary experiences. The kind of memories families collect naturally. The kind that usually disappear into the background of a happy childhood. No one takes photographs of every normal afternoon. No one writes down every conversation. No one expects ordinary moments to become the last evidence of a life that once seemed endless. That is why the memories left behind are often so precious. A child's voice calling from another room. A favorite expression repeated so often that everyone recognizes it. The excitement over a small gift. The frustration over a minor disagreement that feels enormous for 5 minutes and disappears completely afterward. These details are invisible to the outside world. But they are everything to families. When Holly and Jessica disappeared, Britain learned their names through emergency broadcasts and newspaper reports. Their families knew them through years of love and shared experiences. The public searched for two missing children. Their loved ones searched for two irreplaceable people. Those are not the same thing. The investigation that followed would involve thousands of officers, countless interviews, forensic examinations, and one of the largest searches in British history. Every step was necessary. Every piece of evidence mattered. But behind every investigative decision were two simple truths that could never be forgotten. Holly had a family who loved her. Jessica had a family who loved her. They were not case numbers. They were not headlines. They were not merely victims in a criminal prosecution. They were children. The importance of remembering them in that way became especially significant as the investigation progressed and public attention increasingly focused on the person responsible. The name Ian Huntley would eventually become associated with deception, violence, and one of Britain's most shocking crimes. But the story did not begin with him. It began with Holly and Jessica. Beginning with the offender risks allowing the person who caused harm to occupy the center of the story. Beginning with the victims restores the focus where it belongs. Two girls whose lives had value before anyone knew their names. Two friends whose futures should have unfolded over decades. Two children whose absence left a permanent emptiness in the lives of everyone who loved them. The impact of their deaths extended far beyond one town. Parents across the country hugged their children a little tighter. Communities reconsidered how they protected young people. Institutions examined whether they had done enough to prevent individuals from gaining access to vulnerable children. The case became a turning point in discussions about safeguarding and responsibility. But for Holly and Jessica's families, national debates could never replace personal loss. No policy change could restore birthdays that would never come. No investigation could return the future that had been taken. No verdict could erase the pain of knowing that two children who had walked out of their homes on an ordinary evening would never walk back through those doors. The greatest tragedy of the Soham murders is not only what happened. It is everything that should have happened instead. The classrooms they should have entered. The friendships they should have continued. The dreams they should have discovered. The adults they should have become. Every person who knew Holly and Jessica carried memories of who they were, and those memories remain the most important part of their story. Because before the investigation began, before the courtroom arguments, before the headlines and national attention, there were two girls living ordinary lives in a quiet English town. Two girls who trusted the world around them. Two girls who deserved the chance to grow up. And on August 4, 2002, that ordinary world changed forever. On the afternoon of August 4, 2002, nothing about Soham suggested that history was about to change forever. It was a Sunday, the kind of summer day that seemed to move slowly. The streets carried the familiar quiet of a small English town. Families enjoyed time together before another week began. Windows were open to let in the warm air. Gardens showed signs of life after weeks of summer weather. Somewhere in the distance, everyday sounds blended together, the movement of traffic along familiar roads, conversations between neighbors, children playing outside. For Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, it was supposed to be just another ordinary day. They were 10 years old. They were friends. They were together. And like many children their age during school holidays, they were looking for something simple to make the afternoon more enjoyable. A trip to buy sweets. A short walk. A few minutes away from home. Nothing about that decision seemed unusual. It was the kind of small freedom children in communities like Soham experienced regularly. A quick journey to a nearby shop was not considered dangerous. It was part of growing up. It was part of learning independence. For their families, there was no reason to believe this walk would be any different from all the others before it. The girls left without anyone imagining that this would be the last time they were seen alive. That is what makes the beginning of this case so painful. There was no dramatic warning. No obvious moment when danger announced itself. The day did not begin with fear. It began with normality. Holly and Jessica were not leaving home to enter a dangerous situation. They were not aware of any threat around them. They were simply two children following the ordinary rhythm of childhood, where small plans feel important and short trips feel like little adventures. They walked through a town they knew. A town they believed they understood. A town their families believed was safe. At some point during that afternoon, their paths crossed with Ian Huntley. The exact details of those first moments became central to the investigation that followed. Prosecutors later argued that Huntley used his familiarity within the community and his connection to the girls through his role at the local school to gain their trust. He was not a stranger appearing from nowhere. He was someone whose presence would not immediately have seemed alarming. That fact would later become one of the most disturbing elements of the case. The danger did not come from an unfamiliar face in a distant place. It came from someone who appeared to belong. Huntley was 30 years old at the time. He worked as a caretaker at Sohom Village College, where his responsibilities placed him within an environment connected to children and education. His partner, Maxine Carr, worked as a teaching assistant and had links to the same school community. To many people around them, they appeared to be an ordinary young couple. They lived an ordinary life. They had ordinary jobs. They occupied familiar roles. And that appearance of normality would later make the truth even more difficult for the community to process. Investigators would eventually reconstruct the events of August 4 through witness statements, forensic evidence, and Huntley's own changing accounts. But in the immediate aftermath, there was no clear understanding of what had happened. The girls were simply missing. Their families were waiting. Their community was searching. And somewhere beyond public view, the truth was already hidden. When Holly and Jessica did not return home as expected, concern began gradually. At first, there was still room for innocent explanations. Children lose track of time. Plans change. Friends stop somewhere longer than expected. Parents know these situations. They have happened countless times in countless families. But as the afternoon became evening, uncertainty began replacing reassurance. Calls were made. Questions were asked. Friends and relatives searched places where the girls might have gone. The simple phrase "they are not home" yet slowly transformed into something far more frightening. They are missing. Those words carry a different weight. They change the atmosphere inside a family immediately. The ordinary sounds of a home become unbearable. A quiet hallway. An empty bedroom. A phone that does not ring. Every passing minute creates another possibility, and every possibility creates another fear. For Holly and Jessica's families, the hours that followed were filled with a desperate hope that the explanation would be simple. Perhaps they would return soon. Perhaps someone would call. Perhaps the entire nightmare would end with the sound of two familiar voices saying they were sorry for being late. But the evening continued. And the girls did not come home. As darkness approached, the search began expanding beyond family and friends. Neighbors joined. Police were contacted. Information began spreading through the community. The streets that had felt safe only hours earlier now became places filled with questions. Where had the girls gone? Who had seen them last? Had anyone noticed something unusual? The investigation began with uncertainty because investigators had very little to work with. There were no immediate answers. No clear suspect. No confirmed explanation. Only two missing children and a community determined to find them. In the days that followed, every possible scenario had to be considered. Perhaps the girls had wandered farther than expected. Perhaps they had gone somewhere without telling anyone. Perhaps someone had taken them. Each possibility carried its own fears. But as detectives examined the timeline, one fact became increasingly important. The girls had disappeared quickly. There was no long journey. No clear trail leading away from Sohom. Their last known movements occurred close to home, within a familiar environment. That meant investigators had to look carefully at the people and places closest to them. The very things that made Sohom feel safe, the familiarity, the trust, the close connections between residents, now became part of the challenge. Because in a small community, everyone knows everyone. But knowing someone's face is not the same as knowing the truth about them. As the search intensified, Ian Huntley would become one of the people at the center of attention, not because suspicion immediately fell upon him, but because he was there. He was part of the community. He was connected to the school. He was among those who appeared concerned. In the days after the disappearance, he would speak publicly about the missing girls. He would appear on television. He would present himself as someone who wanted answers just as much as everyone else. At that moment, however, nobody knew what those appearances would later mean. Nobody knew that the man speaking about the search would eventually become the person accused of ending it in the most devastating way imaginable. The afternoon that began with two children walking to buy sweets had become the beginning of a national tragedy. A simple moment of childhood freedom had turned into the opening chapter of a case that would expose hidden failures, challenge public trust, and permanently change the way Britain viewed the safety of children. But before the investigation uncovered the truth, there were still many unanswered questions. And for nearly 2 weeks, one desperate hope remained above all others. That Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman would somehow be found alive. The days following the disappearance of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman became a race against time. For their families, time was no longer measured by clocks or calendars. It was measured by moments of waiting. Every telephone call carried the possibility of life-changing news. Every knock at the door caused a rush of emotion. Every unfamiliar vehicle stopping nearby created a brief spark of hope before reality returned. For investigators, every hour mattered. In missing child cases, the earliest period is often considered crucial. Memories are fresh. Witnesses may still remember small details. Evidence that could disappear over time may still exist. Detectives knew they needed to understand exactly where Holly and Jessica had gone after leaving home and who they had encountered during those final known moments. The search expanded rapidly. Officers moved through Sohom and the surrounding countryside, examining places that most residents had never considered dangerous. Fields, paths, drainage areas, abandoned buildings, and quiet stretches of road were searched carefully. The landscape that had once represented freedom and open space now became a grid of possibilities. Every location had to be considered. Every possibility had to be followed. Volunteers joined police officers in extraordinary numbers. People who had never met Holly or Jessica walked through fields under the summer sun because they could not accept that 2 children from their community might disappear without answers. They carried photographs. They followed instructions from search coordinators. They scanned the ground hoping to find anything that could lead investigators closer to the girls. The public response reflected the emotional impact of the case. Holly and Jessica were no longer known only within Sohom. Their faces appeared throughout Britain. Their names became part of daily conversations. People who had never visited Cambridgeshire felt connected to the search because the circumstances were painfully understandable. The girls had not been involved in anything unusual. They had not disappeared during some distant journey. They had simply gone out for a short time. A normal childhood moment had become unimaginable. Meanwhile, investigators began examining the timeline with increasing precision. The last confirmed sighting of the girls became one of the most important pieces of information. Detectives needed to understand their movements after they left their families. They needed to separate fact from assumption. They needed to know which details were reliable and which memories might have been influenced by the enormous media attention surrounding the case. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly. Residents were asked to think back carefully. What had they seen? What had they heard? What vehicles had been nearby? Had anything seemed unusual? Often, the most valuable evidence in an investigation does not initially appear important. A brief conversation. A passing observation. A detail someone almost forgot to mention. Detectives searched for those details. At the same time, the emotional pressure surrounding the case grew stronger. The longer Holly and Jessica remained missing, the harder it became for the community to maintain optimism. Yet publicly, people continued to hope. Posters remained visible throughout the town. Volunteers continued searching. Families continued waiting. Hope became an act of endurance. Then, within this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, Ian Huntley remained a visible figure. His involvement in the aftermath would later become one of the most closely examined aspects of the case. At the time, however, his behavior did not immediately separate him from everyone else who was trying to help. He was a local resident. He was connected to the school community. He appeared willing to cooperate. He spoke to journalists who gathered outside his home. He expressed concern for the missing girls. To viewers watching from outside Sohom, his interviews created the impression of someone affected by the same tragedy as everyone else. He appeared calm. He appeared sympathetic. He appeared like a person searching for answers. That public image would later become one of the most disturbing contrasts in the entire investigation. Because while Britain watched the search unfold, detectives would eventually discover that the story being presented to the public was very different from the reality hidden behind closed doors. But at this stage, investigators still had to work through uncertainty. They did not yet have the full picture. They did not yet know the extent of the deception. They were still searching for 2 missing children. As the investigation continued, attention naturally turned toward the people closest to the girls. In cases involving missing children, investigators must examine every possibility. They cannot rely on assumptions about who seems trustworthy. They must consider relationships, opportunities, movements, and access. That process is difficult because it requires questioning the very foundations of community life. The people who appear familiar. The people who appear helpful. The people who appear safe. Every person connected to the girls had to be considered through the same careful process. No one could be excluded simply because they seemed unlikely. No one could be accused simply because suspicion existed. Evidence had to lead the way. During this period, police began looking more closely at the circumstances surrounding Huntley. His connection to the girls through the school environment made him relevant to the investigation. He knew the area. He knew the community. He was someone the girls would have recognized. That familiarity became significant. Not because familiarity itself indicates guilt, but because in any investigation, understanding relationships is essential. How did people know one another? How much access did they have? What opportunities existed? What explanations matched the evidence? These questions formed the foundation of the investigation. Behind the scenes, detectives worked through enormous amounts of information. The case generated public attention on a scale rarely seen for a local disappearance. Every development was analyzed by journalists. Every police statement was examined. The pressure to find answers increased with each passing day. But investigators understood that public pressure could not replace careful work. They needed facts. They needed evidence. They needed the truth. Then came the moment that changed the direction of everything. The discovery on August 17 ended the desperate search for 2 missing children and began a murder investigation. The hope that had carried families and volunteers through 13 painful days was replaced by grief. The question was no longer whether Holly and Jessica would return home. The question became who had taken them away. And as detectives began searching for that answer, they would uncover a series of events that revealed how a person who appeared ordinary could hide an extraordinary level of deception. The investigation was about to enter its darkest chapter. The discovery that Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were no longer missing children, but victims of a terrible crime, changed the nature of the investigation completely. For 13 days, the people of Sohom had searched with one desperate hope in mind. Find the girls. Bring them home. Every search team walking through fields, every police officer reviewing information, every volunteer scanning roadsides carried that same expectation. Even as fear grew, many people held on to the belief that there was still a chance for a different ending. Then that possibility disappeared. The discovery of 2 bodies near RAF Lakenheath brought the search to a devastating conclusion. The location was not a place most people in Sohom had ever considered significant. It was simply another quiet part of the surrounding countryside, another piece of the landscape that had always existed in the background of everyday life. Now it became the place where a community's worst fears were confirmed. The transition from missing person investigation to murder inquiry happened instantly. The language changed. The priorities changed. The emotional weight changed. Investigators were no longer trying to answer where Holly and Jessica had gone. They were trying to understand how their lives had ended. For the families, There are no words that can adequately describe that moment. The uncertainty of not knowing had finally ended, but the answer brought a different kind of pain. The hope that had sustained them for nearly 2 weeks was replaced by grief that would never fully disappear. For the people of Sohom, the discovery created a feeling that was difficult to process. Many had spent days searching their own surroundings, walking familiar roads, looking across familiar fields, passing through places they had known their entire lives. The realization that the girls had been nearby all along added another layer of heartbreak. The town had searched because it cared. The town had searched because it believed the girls could still be found. Now everyone had to face a reality no one wanted to accept. The investigation moved quickly. A crime scene was established. Forensic specialists began examining the area. Every piece of evidence had to be collected carefully. The smallest detail could become important. A mark on the ground. A trace of material. A pattern of movement. Something overlooked in the early stages could later become central to understanding what had happened. Forensic work is often invisible to the public. While news cameras focus on police activity and official statements, investigators quietly build cases through patience and precision. They photograph locations, collect samples, document observations, and reconstruct events from fragments left behind. In the Sohom investigation, that process would eventually reveal a disturbing sequence of events. But before those conclusions could be reached, detectives needed to understand the movements of everyone connected to the girls, including Ian Huntley. By this point, Huntley's name had already become familiar to the public. He was not unknown. He had appeared on television. He had spoken about the disappearance. He had presented himself as someone who wanted Holly and Jessica found. Now investigators had to examine his statements with a different perspective. Every word mattered. Every timeline detail mattered. Every inconsistency mattered. The person who had appeared publicly concerned was now a central figure in a homicide investigation. The contrast was shocking. For many people watching from outside Sohom, the most unsettling aspect was not only the crime itself, but the apparent normality surrounding the accused. Huntley did not fit the image many people expected when they imagined a dangerous offender. He was someone neighbors recognized. Someone with a job. Someone who moved through the community without attracting widespread suspicion. That reality forced difficult questions. How well do we really know the people around us? How much do we rely on appearances? How often do we mistake familiarity for understanding? Those questions would become central themes of the case. As investigators continued examining evidence, Huntley maintained his innocence and provided explanations about what had happened. Over time, however, police identified contradictions between his accounts and the evidence they were gathering. The investigation became a process of separating truth from deception. The timeline became increasingly important. What happened during the period after Holly and Jessica were last seen? Who had access to them? What movements could be confirmed? What explanations matched the physical evidence? Each answer created another question. Each question brought investigators closer to the truth. The case also began revealing a wider problem beyond the actions of one individual. As police examined Huntley's background, concerns emerged about previous allegations and information that had not been properly shared between different authorities. These failures would later become a major focus of public discussion and lead to significant reforms in the way information about people working with children was handled. But in those immediate days after the discovery, the priority was justice for Holly and Jessica. A nation wanted answers. 2 families deserved the truth. And detectives knew that the only way to provide those answers was through careful, evidence-based investigation. The attention surrounding the case intensified. News organizations followed every development. Reporters gathered outside police stations. The public waited for information. But behind the headlines was a much slower and more difficult process. Investigators had to reconstruct the final moments of 2 children's lives. They had to examine not only what happened, but why. They had to understand the actions of a person who had spent days appearing to help search for the very children he was accused of killing. That contradiction would become one of the defining features of the Soham murders. The image of a concerned community member and the reality uncovered by investigators could not have been further apart. The case had entered a new phase. The search was over. The investigation had begun. And as detectives followed the evidence, the story of what happened inside the quiet streets of Soham would gradually emerge, a story involving deception, missed warnings, and failures that would eventually change child protection procedures across Britain. But before the courtroom would hear the evidence, before a jury would decide guilt or innocence, investigators first had to complete the difficult task of uncovering every detail of what happened on August 4, 2002. Because for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, the truth was now the only thing left to find. The discovery of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman marked the moment when uncertainty finally gave way to a devastating reality. For nearly 2 weeks, Soham had existed in a painful space between fear and hope. Families waited for a phone call that could change everything. Volunteers searched fields believing that somewhere, somehow, 2 children might still be found alive. Then the search ended. But the questions had only begun. Finding the girls was not the end of the investigation. It was the beginning of the most difficult part, understanding exactly what had happened, reconstructing the final hours of their lives, and identifying the person responsible. The countryside surrounding Soham, once viewed simply as part of the town's peaceful character, became the center of a meticulous forensic examination. The area near RAF Lakenheath was transformed from an ordinary piece of land into a crime scene. Police officers established boundaries. Forensic specialists moved carefully through the area, aware that every object, every mark, and every trace could potentially provide answers. The work was slow. It had to be. A crime scene does not reveal its secrets immediately. Evidence rarely presents itself in a dramatic way. There are no clear signs pointing directly to a single conclusion. Instead, investigators often work with fragments, a collection of small details that only become meaningful when carefully connected. A mark on the ground. A piece of material. A timeline that does not match. A statement that changes slightly when examined more closely. The truth of a crime is often hidden within these details. For the investigators assigned to the Soham murders, the responsibility was enormous. They were not simply gathering evidence for a legal case. They were reconstructing the final moments of 2 children whose families were desperate for answers. Every decision carried emotional weight. Every discovery brought them closer to the truth while also revealing more about the tragedy itself. As forensic teams examined the location where Holly and Jessica were found, detectives began working backward. The question was no longer only where were they found. It became, how did they get there? That question required a complete reconstruction. Investigators needed to establish movements. They needed to understand transportation. They needed to determine when and where events had occurred. They needed to compare physical evidence with the accounts provided by those involved. This process is often described as building a timeline, but in reality it is more like rebuilding a shattered picture. Each piece must fit correctly. A single incorrect assumption can lead an investigation in the wrong direction. In the Soham case, one of the most important elements was the connection between the victims and Ian Huntley. Huntley was not an unknown person discovered through random investigation. He was already part of the story. He lived locally. He worked at a school. He had connections to the same community as the girls. And most importantly, he had placed himself publicly within the investigation. In the days after Holly and Jessica disappeared, Huntley had spoken to journalists and appeared on television. He had expressed concern. He had participated in the public search for information. Those appearances would later be examined with a completely different understanding. At the time, however, investigators still had to follow procedure. Suspicion was not enough. Emotion was not enough. The case had to be built on evidence. That meant examining Huntley's movements, his statements, his relationships, and his version of events. It meant asking difficult questions. Where was he on August 4th? Who had seen him? Did his timeline match other evidence? Were his explanations consistent? As detectives continued this work, contradictions began to emerge. Statements that appeared simple at first became more complicated under closer examination. Details that seemed insignificant became important when compared against forensic findings. The investigation moved from a search for possibilities toward a search for proof. Meanwhile, the public struggled to understand what had happened. Many people found the case especially disturbing because of the apparent contrast between the crime and the environment in which it occurred. Sohom had represented safety. Schools represented protection. Familiar adults represented trust. The possibility that someone connected to that environment could commit such a crime created a sense of betrayal that extended far beyond the immediate victims. Parents across Britain began questioning the systems designed to protect children. How were people selected for positions involving young people? What information was available about someone's past? Were authorities communicating effectively? Could something like this have been prevented? Those questions would eventually lead to major changes, but at that moment, investigators remained focused on the immediate task. They needed to prove what happened. They needed to establish responsibility. They needed to give Holly and Jessica's families the answers they deserved. The forensic investigation also revealed the disturbing lengths taken to hide the crime. The evidence suggested that after the girls were killed, attempts had been made to conceal what had happened and remove traces of the crime. The location where they were discovered showed investigators that they were not dealing with an accidental event or a moment of panic that ended immediately. They were dealing with a deliberate attempt to hide two murders. That realization changed the emotional character of the investigation. The disappearance had already been heartbreaking. The evidence now revealed planning and deception. Investigators were no longer only trying to understand a tragedy. They were uncovering the actions of someone who had attempted to control the story surrounding it. The most disturbing aspect was the contrast between the public search and the hidden reality. While volunteers walked through fields looking for Holly and Jessica, the person responsible was presenting himself as someone who wanted the same outcome. While families waited desperately for news, investigators would later conclude that the truth had already been concealed. This contradiction became central to the case. It demonstrated how appearances can be manipulated. How ordinary behavior can sometimes hide extraordinary wrongdoing. And how investigations must look beyond what people choose to show the world. As forensic teams completed their work at the discovery site, detectives continued building the case piece by piece. The physical evidence was only one part of the investigation. The next challenge was understanding the people involved. Their histories. Their relationships. Their statements. Their choices. Because crimes do not happen in isolation. They happen within networks of human behavior. And in the case of Ian Huntley, investigators would soon discover that the story went far beyond what had happened on one August afternoon. It involved years of hidden information, missed warnings, and decisions that would later become the subject of national scrutiny. The discovery of Holly and Jessica had answered the most painful question of all. They were no longer missing. But the investigation was now asking the question that would define everything that followed. How could this have happened? The investigation into the deaths of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman quickly became a complex effort to reconstruct not only the final moments of their lives, but also the chain of decisions and circumstances that allowed the crime to take place. For detectives, the location where the girls were discovered was only one part of the puzzle. A crime scene can reveal what happened afterward. It does not always immediately reveal what happened before. To understand the events of August 4th, investigators had to move backward through time. They had to trace movements, examine relationships, and separate reality from the explanations offered by those involved. The process required patience. There was no single piece of evidence that instantly explained everything. Instead, investigators assembled hundreds of small details. A conversation remembered by a witness. A vehicle movement. A phone call. A person's account of where they had been. A timeline that seemed almost correct but contained small inconsistencies. In criminal investigations, contradictions often become significant because they reveal where a story does not match reality. That became increasingly important in the case of Ian Huntley. From the beginning, Huntley occupied an unusual position within the investigation. He was not simply someone connected to the community. He was someone who had actively placed himself in the public eye. His interviews with journalists after the girls disappeared had been broadcast across Britain. Viewers saw a man who appeared concerned and willing to help. He spoke about the tragedy affecting Sohom and presented himself as another person searching for answers. But once detectives began examining the evidence, those public appearances took on a different meaning. Investigators had to consider a difficult possibility. What if someone who appeared to be helping was actually involved? This is one of the hardest challenges in any investigation. People naturally judge others through visible behavior. Someone who appears calm, cooperative, and sympathetic is often perceived as trustworthy. Someone who seems distressed appears less likely to be responsible. But investigators cannot rely on appearances. They must examine facts. They must compare words with evidence. They must ask whether a person's actions truly match the reality of what happened. As detectives focused more closely on Huntley, they examined his connection to the girls through Sohom Village College. His role as caretaker meant he was a familiar adult within a school environment. He was someone students and staff would recognize. He belonged to the everyday background of school life. That familiarity became a crucial part of understanding how the crime could have occurred. Holly and Jessica were not approached by someone completely unknown to them. The person at the center of the investigation was someone whose presence would not automatically create alarm. That fact would later become one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. The investigation also began examining Huntley's personal history. As police looked deeper, they discovered concerns about previous allegations involving him. These incidents had occurred in different locations and involved different police forces. The information had not been effectively brought together in a way that prevented him from obtaining work that placed him in contact with children. This became one of the most significant consequences of the case. The issue was not only the actions of one offender. It was the failure of systems designed to identify risks. The question that followed was painful. Could better communication between authorities have prevented what happened? That question would eventually lead to a major independent inquiry and changes in safeguarding procedures across the United Kingdom. But in the immediate investigation, detectives were focused on proving the events surrounding August 4th. They needed to understand what happened after Holly and Jessica left their families. They needed to establish how the girls came into contact with Huntley. They needed to determine how their bodies were transported to the location where they were found. They needed to understand the actions taken afterward to conceal evidence. According to the prosecution case later presented at trial, Huntley attempted to hide the crime by moving the girls' bodies and returning to the location where they had been left in an attempt to destroy evidence. These details demonstrated to investigators that they were dealing with deliberate actions rather than a simple unexplained tragedy. The search for answers also involved examining Huntley's relationship with Maxine Carr. Carr, his partner at the time, became another important figure in the investigation because of questions surrounding her statements and whether she had provided him with an alibi. Her involvement would later become a separate legal matter. The investigators' challenge was to determine exactly what each person knew, when they knew it, and what actions they took afterward. Knowledge and involvement are not always the same thing. The law requires evidence. It requires proof. It requires separating assumptions from facts. As the investigation progressed, the pressure on detectives increased. The public wanted immediate answers. Families wanted justice. The media followed every development. But building a criminal case requires more than public certainty. It requires evidence strong enough to withstand examination in court. Every statement had to be checked. Every timeline had to be verified. Every conclusion had to be supported. The investigators knew that the eventual trial would not be judged by emotion, even though the emotional impact of the case was enormous. It would be judged by evidence. That evidence gradually created a clearer picture. The man who had appeared on television asking for information was now accused of being responsible for the very crime the nation had been watching unfold. The contrast was difficult for many people to accept. It challenged the comforting belief that dangerous individuals are always obvious. Huntley's appearance, occupation, and public behavior had allowed him to blend into the community. He did not match the image many people expected. And that was precisely why the case had such a lasting impact. It forced society to examine uncomfortable truths about trust, about familiarity, about the importance of proper safeguards. As investigators continued their work, the final hours of Holly and Jessica's lives became clearer. The evidence pointed toward a sequence of events that began with a seemingly ordinary afternoon and ended with a crime that would permanently change the town of Sohom. But understanding what happened was only part of the challenge. The next question was even more difficult. Why had no one seen the warning signs before it was too late? To answer that question, investigators would have to look beyond the crime itself and examine the history of the man at the center of it. As investigators continued to build the case, one of the most troubling aspects of the Sohom murders became increasingly clear: the crime did not exist in isolation. It was connected to a series of decisions, missed opportunities, and failures that had taken place long before August 4, 2002. The discovery of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman had revealed the devastating outcome. Now investigators, officials, and eventually the public would have to confront the circumstances that allowed Ian Huntley to occupy a position of trust within a school environment. The question was no longer only about what happened inside a house on a summer afternoon. It was also about what had happened years before. Who had known what? What information existed? Who had access to it? And why had that information not prevented Huntley from working around children? These questions would become central to the national discussion that followed the case. But before those wider issues could be examined, investigators still had to complete the immediate task of proving the events surrounding Holly and Jessica's deaths. The evidence gathered from the crime scene and surrounding investigation gradually created a timeline. It showed that after the girls disappeared, a series of actions had taken place designed to conceal the truth. The movements of vehicles, the examination of physical evidence, and the inconsistencies in Huntley's explanations all contributed to the prosecution's argument that the deaths were deliberate and that attempts had been made afterward to hide what had happened. Forensic specialists worked carefully to establish the connection between locations. A crime scene is rarely limited to one place. Evidence can exist in multiple environments. The place where an event begins may be different from the place where investigators later discover the consequences. That meant detectives had to examine every relevant location connected to the case, including Huntley's home and the surrounding areas. The house where Huntley lived became one of the most important locations in the investigation. To neighbors, it had been an ordinary home on an ordinary street. A place where daily life appeared to continue normally. But inside, investigators searched for evidence that could reveal what had happened. The contrast was deeply unsettling. Outside, the neighborhood represented the familiar safety of community life. Inside, investigators were searching for answers to one of the most disturbing crimes in modern British history. The work required extreme attention to detail. Forensic examinations do not happen quickly. Specialists document everything. They collect potential evidence. They analyze materials. They attempt to reconstruct events from traces left behind. A single discovery can change the direction of an entire investigation. A small inconsistency can challenge an entire explanation. In the case of Ian Huntley, investigators found that his accounts of events did not match the evidence they were gathering. Initially, Huntley denied responsibility. He provided explanations that changed over time. As detectives compared those explanations against forensic findings and witness information, they concluded that his version of events could not be accepted. The investigation increasingly focused on deception. Not only the deception surrounding the deaths of Holly and Jessica, but also the deception that occurred afterward. The public had watched Huntley speak about the disappearance. They had seen him present himself as a concerned member of the community. They had heard him describe the tragedy affecting Sohom. Now investigators believed those appearances had formed part of a much larger attempt to control how others understood what had happened. That realization was deeply disturbing because it created a painful contrast. While families searched desperately for Holly and Jessica, Huntley had appeared alongside those searching. While volunteers looked across fields hoping to find the girls, he had been presenting himself as someone who wanted the same thing. The idea that someone could behave in that way challenged many people's understanding of criminal behavior. It showed that deception does not always look suspicious. Sometimes it appears calm. Sometimes it appears cooperative. Sometimes it appears completely ordinary. This became one of the most lasting lessons of the case. Investigators cannot determine guilt through appearance. They must follow evidence. As the case moved forward, attention also turned toward Maxine Carr. Her role became another important part of the investigation because of questions surrounding the support she provided to Huntley after the girls disappeared. Carr had initially given Huntley an account of events that supported his claims about his whereabouts. Prosecutors later argued that she had provided a false alibi and had attempted to protect him. Her trial would be separate from Huntley's, and the legal questions surrounding her involvement were distinct from the evidence against him. The investigation therefore had to carefully separate different levels of responsibility. What did each person do? What did each person know? What could be proven beyond reasonable doubt? These distinctions are essential in any criminal case. Public anger may be understandable, especially in a case involving children, but courts must rely on evidence rather than emotion. The Sohom investigation also exposed weaknesses in how information about individuals was shared between organizations. Before the murders, Huntley had come to the attention of police in relation to several allegations. However, records were held across different police forces, and the information was not effectively combined when he later sought employment involving children. After the case, this failure became a major focus of examination. The concern was not simply that a person had committed a crime. It was that systems designed to protect children had failed to identify a potential danger. The consequences extended beyond Sohom. Schools, police forces, and government bodies across Britain reviewed procedures. Background checks became more rigorous. Information sharing practices were examined. Safeguarding became a much greater priority. The tragedy of Holly and Jessica led to changes intended to prevent similar failures in the future. Yet for the families, no reform could change what had already happened. No policy could restore the childhoods that had been lost. No investigation could remove the pain of knowing that two children who should have grown up, graduated, and built their own futures were gone forever. The purpose of finding the truth was not only punishment. It was accountability. It was recognition of what had been taken. It was a way to ensure that Holly and Jessica would not be remembered only through the circumstances of their deaths, but also through the impact their lives and the investigation had on protecting other children. By the end of the investigation phase, detectives had assembled a case built on evidence, timelines, and forensic analysis. The picture was becoming clearer. Ian Huntley was no longer simply a person connected to the tragedy. He was the man who would soon stand trial accused of 2 murders. The next stage would move from investigation rooms and forensic laboratories into a courtroom, where prosecutors and defense lawyers would present competing versions of what happened. There, for the first time, the full story of August 4, 2002, would be examined in public. And a jury would have to decide whether the evidence proved that the man who had appeared before cameras asking for help was, in fact, responsible for the deaths of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. In the early days of the investigation, before Ian Huntley became the central figure in one of Britain's most shocking criminal cases, detectives faced the same uncertainty that surrounds almost every missing child investigation. They did not begin with a name. They began with questions. When a child disappears, investigators must consider every possibility. They must resist the temptation to follow the most obvious explanation or the loudest public theory. A missing person case is a search through uncertainty, where every piece of information could lead toward the truth or create another path that ends nowhere. For Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, the first hours and days after their disappearance were filled with possibilities. They could have become lost. They could have gone somewhere unexpectedly. They could have met someone they knew. They could have encountered a stranger. They could have been taken somewhere against their will. Every scenario had to be considered. Every possibility had to be investigated. The pressure was enormous because the investigators understood something the public often struggled to accept. In the early stages of a case, certainty is rare. The emotional desire for immediate answers is powerful, but police work depends on evidence, not instinct alone. In Sohom, hundreds of people became connected to the search. Neighbors, friends, teachers, local residents, passing motorists. Anyone who might have seen something unusual became important. The police investigation expanded rapidly, creating a vast network of information that had to be examined and verified. Every phone call mattered. Every reported sighting required attention. Every statement had to be recorded. The challenge was separating meaningful details from the overwhelming amount of information generated by a case receiving national attention. When a disappearance captures public interest, the number of possible leads can become both a blessing and a burden. Some information provides breakthroughs. Other information creates distractions. A person may genuinely believe they saw something connected to the case, but memory can be influenced by fear, media coverage, and the passage of time. Investigators must carefully examine each claim before deciding whether it has value. In the Sohom investigation, police followed numerous leads during those first days. Some involved possible sightings of the girls. Others involved vehicles or unfamiliar individuals in the area. Some theories suggested the girls may have left voluntarily. Others raised the possibility of an abduction. Each theory required investigation. Each theory had to be tested against facts. Meanwhile, the families remained caught between hope and fear. The search continued around them, but their experience was intensely personal. For investigators, Holly and Jessica were the focus of a major operation. For their families, they were daughters whose bedrooms remained untouched and whose absence was impossible to accept. The passing of time created a painful tension. The public wanted answers. The media wanted developments. Police needed patience. The investigation could not move based on pressure alone. It had to move based on evidence. One of the difficulties in the early stages was that Sohom was a community built on familiarity. Many people knew one another, which created both advantages and challenges. On one hand, investigators had access to a large network of people who could provide information. On the other hand, familiarity could complicate suspicion. People naturally find it difficult to imagine terrible actions being committed by someone they recognize. A familiar face feels safer than an unknown one. A neighbor feels less threatening than a stranger. A person with a job, a home, and a place within the community often appears less likely to be responsible for serious harm. This psychological tendency influenced how people viewed the investigation in its early stages. Attention often moved toward outsiders. Someone passing through. Someone unknown. Someone who did not belong. The idea that the person responsible might already be part of the community was much harder for many people to accept. Among those interviewed during the investigation was Ian Huntley. At that stage, he was not immediately viewed by the public as the person who would eventually be convicted of murder. He was simply one of many people connected to the case. A local man. A school caretaker. Someone who had information about the area and the people involved. His connection to the school placed him within the wider circle of people investigators needed to speak with. That was normal procedure. Anyone with relevant contact or information had to be considered. At first, nothing about his public image separated him from the many other people who appeared in the aftermath of the disappearance. He spoke with police. He spoke with reporters. He appeared concerned. He expressed sympathy for the families. To those watching from outside Sohom, he appeared to be another person affected by the tragedy. But investigations often reveal their most important discoveries through contradictions. A statement that does not match. A timeline that cannot be explained. A detail that seems insignificant until compared with other evidence. The process of finding the truth is often less about discovering something new and more about recognizing when something does not fit. As detectives continued gathering information, they began looking more closely at the people who had access to the girls and the places connected to their final known movements. The focus gradually shifted from the broad community to specific individuals. Relationships became important. Opportunities became important. Patterns became important. The investigation was narrowing. But before it reached Ian Huntley as its central suspect, police had to explore other possibilities. They had to examine every avenue. They had to eliminate uncertainty one piece at a time. Because in a case involving 2 children, investigators could not afford to ignore any possibility. The search for Holly and Jessica was not only a search for a person. It was a search for the truth. And sometimes the most difficult truth to discover is the one hidden behind the most ordinary appearance.